Okay, so it's been a little while since we've done any content. I have basically been battling quite a nasty chest infection, bit of flu, but time for a live stream, and there is a lot to discuss. Now we're going to start in Australia, and we're going to look at the AFL. Now I haven't done a lot of content on the AFL recently, but there's some breaking news coming out of it. There's an evolving story coming out of the AFL in Australia, and it's concerning league head office facilitating and helping cover up positive drugs tests for recreational drugs by players. Now, these are allegations at this stage, and until allegations are proven, this is a lot of speculation. It's come out in the Australian Parliament during a parliamentary session. An independent member of Parliament in Australia used parliamentary privilege to basically say, hey, look, the AFL is covering up positive drugs tests. Basically, players will go to their team doctor and say, I've been out on, partying on cocaine or ecstasy or smoking a bit too much cannabis, something like that. They would then go to this specialist independent clinic, and the AFL apparently know about it, and basically the players would feign injury and they wouldn't be available for selection until the drugs were out their system, that kind of thing. So, yeah, oh, my beard, look at that beard, look at that lovely beard. So the AFL's in hot water, it's a developing story, and of course, you go back a decade, and of course, we have the peptide scandal that started at Essendon, that eventually became quite a big scandal in Australian sport that made global headlines. And it's sort of, who knew what at the time back in 2012, 2013 with the Essendon doping scandal. Similar to that. Now, it's big news. It's gaining momentum. Other sports are looking at this. We know that there's been allegations leveled at the NRL and individual clubs and individual players about things going on at a club level, but for a league to help cover up positive drugs tests, quite serious stuff. So that's an ongoing story. I will look into it a little bit more. But it's quite an interesting story, and how even on NRL 360 they were talking about it last night. So it's really blowing up quite quickly. It's generating momentum of its own. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll see if any heads roll. We'll see how deep this scandal goes and how many players and club officials are actually involved, because a former team doctor is basically telling whistleblower, member of parliament's got involved, and it's blowing up a little bit. Allegations are being thrown around, not but these allegations, and apparently it's to get around WADA rules. And apparently, if you sign up to the WADA code, you get government funding. So the WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency, and all the leagues, all the major sports in Australia sign up to it, and so therefore they get government funding. So this means extra money comes into the sport through government funds for grassroots projects, stadium, redevelopments, community projects, things like that. And so this has massive financial implications, and the AFL is one of those very, very PR savvy organizations, very politically correct, very I think they are a PR machine. So they work the PR very, very well, and they're like the champagne socialists of the sports world, and so it's blown up big time. And these, again, as I say, allegations that have only surfaced in recent days, but it's gaining momentum of its own. And this could be a Pandora's box if we delve deep enough, and if enough information comes out, and if former and current players and former and current club officials actually decide to blow the whistle on it all. I mean, the AFL has had some negative headlines in recent years, and of course, for many years they couldn't catch Ben Cousins using illicit drugs. So there's a lot of reputational damage that could come of this. But as I say, just allegations. I don't think these allegations are going to go away, and I think, yeah, if it's happening in the AFL, it wouldn't surprise me if it's happening in the NRL and the A League and the other major sports in Australia. It wouldn't surprise me if it is happening in the other leagues as well, but I don't think on the same scale. This seems like almost industrial level of hiding the fact that the playing group are all cokeheads, basically, or pillheads or stoners. And we can debate the pros and cons of recreational drug use with athletes and whether these substances should be criminalized and whether they should be illegal or not. And so we can debate that, and we shall debate that to death. Let's be honest. I've got my views on recreational drugs and whether they should be on the World Anti-Doping banned list. You could argue certain recreationals do have certain aspects of performance enhancing elements to them. So cocaine, for example, can actually help with weight loss. Speed can obviously help with endurance and alertness. Ironically, cannabis can help with pain relief. So yes, there are elements of some of these recreational drugs that do have a potential performance enhancing aspects to them, but yeah, we're in a grey area. But the way that it's been reported is the AFL were aware of these positive tests and didn't take action, didn't suspend players under their recreational drug use policy, and have allowed this situation to form. Now, 1 second. One must get an energy drink beverage. Hello, Jordan. How you doing? I am. Yeah, apologies again, as I say, for the lack of content. Still getting over the tail end of this virusy cold. It's been a bit well, Lewis Rees-Zammit, yeah, he'll probably make the practice squad. There's been a lot said about how he's performed during these tryouts and the sudden on the eve of the Six Nations to say, look, I'm going for the NFL. Now, obviously, we can talk about Christian Wade as a rugby union player. Then we can talk about Valentine Holmes and Jared Hayne and Jordan Malitia. Now, Jordan Malitia has actually made a playing squad. He actually did get drafted. Obviously, Jared Hayne did make a playing squad. Valentine Holmes, I think actually did make the extended squad of an NFL team. But the only one that actually has lasted the course from either code of rugby is Malitia, and he hasn't looked back. Partly because of his size. The rule changes in the NRL and Super League, he'll be gassed. He'll be no good as an interchange forward. He wouldn't be as impactful. Whereas the NFL is a more stop-start, and therefore the endurance aspect of it isn't as required. But yeah, no, I think Lewis Rees-Zammit and the discussions about him being signed up and given a contract, we shall see how that all plays out. But remember, the NFL season is very, very short, and this is their off season. So off seasons are always filled in every sport. So with speculation and conjecture and the rumor mill, and until anything is actually fully confirmed that he's made a training squad and the potentially made the elite playing squad, we should wait and see. I wouldn't say it's more of a blow for Union. I think it's a blow for Welsh Rugby Union, and the way that literally days before the Six Nations started, he went, by the way, see you later. And I do think the Welsh Union has problems because of I think is it the 23 cap rule or something? He was going to have to play in Wales to continue to be selected after a certain point. Now, I think there was an exemption because of his age, but they've lost a talent. And the Welsh Union has money problems. We know this. It's well documented, going back 2 World Cup cycles. But it is troubling that look at the amount of Welsh players that have basically said, who are still playing, who are saying, I'm retiring from the international setup. And the fact that they lost every single game in the Six Nations and got a wooden spoon. By some distance. I mean, there was some distance between the rest and Wales. This wasn't even close. The warning signs have been there since Warren Gatland was last in charge. We do obviously have to wonder how they managed to make a World Cup quarterfinal. Oh yes, that's because Australia were absolutely diabolical. But I said at the time that Warren Gatland was appointed, he's not going to be the saviour. I think he was long in the tooth the last time he was there. People go, oh, but look at his record. Yes, he was there a very, very long time. But the problem is so many Welsh players who are still capable of playing at Test level have retired. Playing players like George North in the as an outside centre really make me scratch my head. And when you're losing, Reece Zammit, I mean that sums up the situation. Yes, I have seen the Georgian Union calling out the Welsh Union. Funny that the relegation talk disappears when Italy aren't at the bottom of the Six Nations. Very, very funny that every year we're saying we should relegate Italy. Well, the media is, and certain people within the hierarchy of world are saying, Italy should be relegated, put Georgia in there or put Portugal in there because Portugal have quite a good setup these days. As soon as Wales get the wooden spoon, that all disappears. All disappears. Because it's the old boys club. But yes, Georgia calling them out is quite funny. But Georgia had a very disappointing World Cup. I was expecting more from them. I think Portugal were the better of the two at the World Cup. But they're the next two. They're the next two cabs off the rank in regards if we are to have promotion and relegation. But the Italians have got a very strong youth setup. They've got a very strong structure now, and they just had to get the right coach. Casada was the right coach they should have had in the last 4 years. So a coaching change and a couple of selection changes, Italy have massively improved. Wales, they've gone, Warren Gatland, save us. He can't. I mean, the whole situation with Wales is Warren Gatland helps choose Wayne Pivac as his successor because they're mates. The only reason why Wales did well for 1 Six Nations out of the last 4 was COVID, disrupting things. Other than that, they have been declining for about 5 years. I think there was 1 Six Nations match this year where they had a prop who was like 6th choice at his club or something. Very young, very inexperienced, starting a Test match. Made me feel old. They've got no experience. That squad is seriously. They're basically playing a under-21s team with a handful of players over the age of 23. There's no experience in that squad. There's no leadership in that squad. Players who are still capable of playing have basically said, we're retiring from the tests. George North could easily play another World Cup. But the problem is he's lost all this experience and they've got no one to replace it with because under Pivac and to a certain extent under Gatland, they kept selecting the same players who were keeping other players out of the side who could have gained a few more test caps, gained a bit more of experience with the systems, and that's backfired. But yeah, I have seen Georgia calling out Wales for a test series, and it's like Argentina. When are they going to get a Lions tour? Like it still is the old boys club. The resistance to, I wouldn't say growing the game, but the resistance in certain aspects in regards to look how long it took Italy to actually get into the Six Nations when it was the Five Nations. And the same can be said of France back in the day as well. There was a lot of resistance to expanding the competition and opening up the doors of the competition to that next guy up kind of mentality, that next team, that next nation. And Georgia and Portugal are now, and to a certain extent Romania at one point, Even Canada and the US, in the late 90s, they were talking about getting Canada into the Six Nations. That resistance has been there for some time. But Italy, when they were admitted, were on the tail end of having a really good team. And they actually had some pretty good players in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then there was that down period, and now they've got this production line of talent coming through, whereas Wales don't. Wales are going the other way. And I can't see this turning around anytime soon. The Welsh regions in the URC are terrible. There's no money. And Welsh fans only seem to turn up for the internationals. They don't support their club sides. I find when it comes to sports fans, I find Welsh rugby union fans pretty insufferable as a rule of thumb. Individually, they're fine. But I've had many a running battle on the channel and on social media with Welsh rugby union fans who are a very toxic bunch for the most part. As a minority, there are those who are quite sensible and admit that the money issues, the structures within the game are terrible, and the team hasn't been performing well for 4 or 5 years. But I find a lot of Welsh fans are insufferable. A lot of them are. They're armchair, they're armchair fans. A lot of them haven't played the game since they were at school, haven't played at like community level or amateur level. Some have never even played the game. But they're happily go dressed as a leek or a sheep or a daffodil to the Principality 8 times a year. But in reality, they're fair weather fans. They don't support the local club game at semi-pro level. They don't even really support the 4 regions. They just turn up when Six Nations are all of internationals, and then they disappear again for half the year. That's my view on Welsh rugby fans. They are a toxic bunch. They're a fair weather bunch. They can't take criticism. I've had my running battles with them. I'm not saying all Welsh rugby fans are bad, but my experience is that they're quite a toxic bunch of human beings, because they got very used to success under Warren Gatland, and now they're losing. They've all suddenly disappeared. But for many years, you couldn't criticise Warren Gatland's selections. You couldn't criticise the team. You basically had to put up with a barrage of abuse. And you can look at my comment sections. It's just, it actually cost me some subscribers, which I don't miss. I do have Welsh subscribers, and the Welsh viewers that I have, for me, seem to be the minority of Welsh rugby union fans. But I'm assuming they are. They've got a very vocal minority of toxic fans. That's my viewpoint on it. That's how I see it. And that's over 6-7 years of basically putting up with their crappy comments, their crappy attitude, and now I'm feeling kind of smug because their team is doing really, really badly and they're in meltdown, which is hilarious. So I call them fair weather fans. But the way the Welsh Union has gone about saying all Welsh players after a certain age or so many caps have to play in Wales to be selected, the game can't sustain it financially. They've just lost Rhys Zammit to the NFL. I don't think Rhys Zammit comes back. Personally, I don't think he comes back. I think they've lost Rhys. It's like Christian Wade with England. Very talented player, and the game loses that talented player for a variety of reasons, and they can't get that player back. And then you look at some of the other nations, and Aldrich could play for Scotland because his dad was Scottish. Is it Varney for Italy? His dad's Welsh. Padriello, I think he's half English or half Welsh. So there's players playing in the other 5 nations who could represent another nation, who are lost to that nation because of whatever happens in the selection process or the player development process, and they see a better opportunity playing for another nation which they're eligible for, and it's a loss to the nation that doesn't select them. And of course, international selection rules have been a big talking point because players have played for more than one nation, and there's got to be a gap between selection for one nation and the other. We've seen that with several nations at the last World Cup. But I'm slowly falling out of love with rugby union. If I'm honest, I've slowly fallen out of love with the direction, because of the direction the sport is taking. And this is coming from a guy who's grown up playing the game, watching the game, studying the game. I had a comment in regards to what French game was it? It was a France game, and Thomas was playing at fly half, but it was Lagarrick that won them the game. And this guy was saying, "You're talking at your arse, I don't know what you're talking about, you're crap, you don't know what you're doing." I said, "Well, I've been playing rugby since this age, I've been watching it since this age, and Lagarrick was the better player, Ramos was just there." And I was basically, I said, funny that he, and again, like, fine. I think, was it the Ireland game? I can't remember. But yeah, that's something. Swapping rugby codes. South Sydney have started with a 3-game losing streak to this current NRL season. And there's been a lot of talk about the departure of Sam Burgess from the coaching setup at the end of last season, and what's happening with the team. They've only won 4 out of the last 14 games. They've basically on this losing run for just over half a season since the middle of last season. And they'd obviously missed the top 8 last year. They were, after I think 11 or 12 rounds, they were top, and then they not won any games really. They won like 4 games out of, let's say 14, 15 games. I think they weren't too far off in Vegas against the Sea Eagles. They just ran into a team that was a bit better prepared and a bit better motivated and slightly fitter. But as the season has progressed, that defeat to the Roosters was just shambolic. And obviously Sam Burgess had some thoughts when he was leaving his coaching role at South Sydney. He basically pointed out that certain players were getting preferential treatment. That's Cody Walker and Latrell Mitchell. And of course, Latrell Mitchell's been in the headlines a lot so far this season. And I could have done several videos on the subject, but I'm going to discuss it now. The Spencer Leniu racism scandal, 8-game suspension. I understand the feeling that the playing group as a whole across all 17 teams had on the issue, and how passionate those feelings are. And it was a unique circumstance. The only other time I can think of where a player has been suspended for making derogatory comments on the field aimed at another player was Montoya, when I believe he was a Canterbury. Was he a Canterbury player at the time? And he got a 4-game ban. And that was a couple of seasons ago. Not one single player came out and passed comment on the judiciary process until the process was done. He got 4 games. He made a homophobic slur against an opposition player. Fanua Blake got, I think, 6 games for verbally abusing an official when he was a Sea Eagle before he moved to the Warriors. He got a ban, and again, no players or coaches came out and said anything during the judiciary process. And they're in recent seasons. They're since the COVID shutdowns. These are in recent seasons. 2 players between them have got 10 games for things said on the field towards another player or an official. The Spencer Leniu incident, obviously, because the teams were over in Vegas, there was a bit of a delay to the judiciary process. And that time frame, that delay, contributed to a lot of speculation about how many games he was going to get suspended for, the fact, he didn't deny saying what he'd said. Just Latrell Mitchell being, front and centre, started, suggesting he should get a lengthy ban, was making a lot of comments before the judiciary process and hearing was held. and he wasn't reprimanded by the league for this, which ultimately basically became, oh well, it's an absolute shambles. Anyone can say anything, and there's going to be no punishment. Then we had the expletive interview after a heavy defeat, where he was dropping, f bombs, and then he admitted that he didn't care that he was on a live interview on a live radio broadcast, basically just going through the alphabet of swear words, and repetitively and repeatedly just kept swearing. Said he didn't care that he was swearing, said he was fully aware of what he was doing, didn't care. That was the only interview that was pulled from broadcast. Every other player who gave an interview, whether they won or they lost, regardless of their own personal performance, went to air. His was pulled, and the radio station that he was giving the interview to got punished for it because they were going live at the time, doing a live interview. This wasn't a pre-recorded interview, which was going to be then played later on like a news bulletin or a roundup. This was going live. The broadcaster got in a fair bit of trouble. Latrell Mitchell, no fine, no suspension, no formal warning. And then we circle back to South Sydney and Sam Burgess's departure, and he made reference to the fact that Cody Walker and Latrell Mitchell are getting preferential treatment, and that's disrupting the team, it's dividing the team, splitting the squad, and out the door he goes. Jason Demetriou doesn't come across as a particularly strong coach. I can see that if the Bulldogs beat the Bunnies this weekend, I can see Demetriou losing his job before season's end. It's been a very long time since the Rabbitohs have lost 4 in a row to start a season. They are a club in trouble. There's been a lot of talk about Latrell Mitchell moving to the centres and Jack Wighton going to fullback. The fact that Latrell Mitchell is playing at fullback is a mind boggler to me. He's not a fullback. He's always been a left centre. That is the only position where he's truly effective, potentially on the wing. But that would mean dropping Alex Johnson, which you're not going to do. And the way that the team play, they're very left-hand heavy in their attack. It's very obvious they're going to their left-hand side. So you're going to put your best defenders on your right-hand side channel to defend against them. You nullify their left-hand attack, they can't score. Defensively, they're a shambles. And Latrell Mitchell goes missing in games. He goes missing in games. Against the Roosters was terrible. Defensively, he was shocking. Cody Walker, I think you can see he's forcing the play. They are missing some key players. Campbell Graham, I think, is a big loss on their right-hand side, on their right edge. So there are some injuries there. But there is clearly a very, very divided dressing room. And there's clearly a very, very divided opinions on certain things. But I think the influence that Latrell Mitchell and Cody Walker have, I think is a negative. I think because a head coach is inexperienced at this level and is clearly not truly got the respect of the players. And Latrell Mitchell was creating headlines away from the Bunnies in regards to his own individual interviews he's giving, where he's basically breaking the rules. If another player did that at any club, they're getting fined, suspended, reprimanded. The club's getting fined. I find the Rabbitohs statement saying that the press coverage and articles written have a racist undertone towards Latrell Mitchell. No, they're calling out his bad behaviour. His attitude stinks. His ego stinks. He's not putting the application in. He is lazy. He is overweight. he's not performing to the salary they're paying him. So I don't know what else to say to that. I still think his best position is left centre, but I don't think just changing him from fullback to left centre is really going to solve the problems of the big egos in that dressing room that aren't being managed very well. That is having a negative impact on the team. It's a team that's fighting itself. They've got a lot of strike power. They've got a lot of talent. They've got one of the best wingers all time the game has ever seen in Alex Johnson. One of the best pure finishes the game has ever seen. They've got some very exciting players there. But they've got some big egos, and they've made some roster errors, like team management errors, with letting players go, letting players retire without adequately replacing them. They have got some injury concerns, and they've got players out, and they have made some decisions that I think are currently impacting the team. Now, if they lose the Bulldogs, they're in serious trouble. That's their season potentially done. I think there's only one team that's made the top 8 after losing their first 5 games in the last 18 years, and that was Manly back in 2020, when they lost 5 in a row. 2021, Manly lost 5 in a row or something, and then they went on to make the top 8. So only one team in 18 years has had a start to a season like this and then made the top 8. I can't see Souths doing it. Not with how they're playing. Not with how they finished last season. The club have now basically pulled Latrell Mitchell from media duties. They're getting other players to front the media when they have to give their standard media duties. They're basically saying Latrell Mitchell is off bounds to giving interviews, which again I don't think that doubling down doesn't help. The damage has been done. I think the way the NRL have dealt with it has basically made things worse, because a lot of people are saying, well, he's a protected player. It's like, apparently we're not allowed to criticise him. I think we should be allowed to criticise him. His performances aren't good enough, and the non-playing issues playing out the way they are contributing to greater speculation about what's happening in the changing room, what's happening with the club, and performances not being great. It's not a good state of affairs. Staying in the Sydney area, obviously Leichhardt Oval, there's been a lot of discussion about the future of Leichhardt and the fact that the New South Wales state government has basically said there's no money available to give to the West Tigers to upgrade that particular stadium, even though they're giving Penrith over 300 million Australian dollars to rebuild Panthers Stadium and upgrade it. They won't give the West Tigers 30 million to fix Leichhardt. There are several stadiums in need of upgrade or replacement. You could argue Canberra need a new stadium. The Raiders. You could argue that Belmore needs further upgrades for the Bulldogs, and they lost money off. They sell out that stadium last weekend. They lost money on that game. You could argue that St George Illawarra could potentially use upgrades to their 2 stadiums a little bit more, just to modernise them a little bit more. Obviously, Parramatta, the Eels, got their brand new stadium. That was a big, expensive rebuild a few years back. The New South Wales government has contributed a fair amount of money to stadium redevelopments and upgrades. The Roosters get their new stadium re-upgraded, the Sydney Football Stadium. But the West Tigers, not the future at Leichhardt looks uncertain. There does need to be an upgrade done there. It's uncertain future. concerning. But what can you do? The New South Wales government says the money isn't there. Now, I don't know when they signed off on the Penrith money, but this then triggers a debate about whether regional government or government in general are the ones who should sump up the cash for stadium developments, or should it be done privately? This is an argument that's been had, not just in Australia, but across the world. Should it be government funded? Should it be privately funded? Should the taxpayers foot the bill in this regard? And hey, you'll see a lot of these promises given in election years or in marginal seats. The politicians will go, "Ooh, this will look good if we do say yes or no to this," trying to sway voters because of the social aspect to sport and the community aspect to sport. We've seen government funds being pumped into sport. We mentioned it earlier in regards to the AFL and their situation. Yeah, I mean, re-examine it. Yes, he could absolutely. I think what is telling though that he was touted as the superstar for Welsh Rugby Union before the last World Cup. They were building him up. He's a very good player. He's still a bit raw in regards to certain aspects of his game as a rugby player. But the shock when it comes out of the blue, I honestly believe that. Yes, I think the NFL have approached him, or his agents approached the NFL. They've seen the international player pathway. Other rugby players of both codes have gone through the pathway. Some had more success than others, but the pathway is there. Obviously, the situation with the Welsh Union, the lack of money. We don't know the true ins and outs of why he's decided to go at this particular point. But he was one of the few marketable assets the Welsh Union had. He was one of the few marketable assets they actually had, and they've now lost him. And I don't think he comes back. I honestly don't think he comes back to Welsh rugby. I think he's lost to the game. We don't know how it's going to pan out in the NFL. Obviously, NFL American football is completely different set of skills required, and a different type of fitness required. And of course, you've got all the pads and helmets and stuff, which is again different physical attributes are required. He's definitely got the pace, and he's actually quite a big lad. He's not small. 20 years ago, he would have been classed as a number 8, so rather than a winger. So he's got size. He's surprisingly a very big bloke. He's not a small man, but yeah, that's a loss to the game. A potential future Lion gone from any potential future Lions tour in years to come. I personally think he could be lost to rugby union, or both codes of rugby for that matter. I think rugby league could lose out on him as well if they were to try and snatch him up. But we were having the same discussion about Henry Arundel. Arundel decides to sign an extension in France, which makes him ineligible for England. This is a problem that some of the home nations, or some of the Six Nations, are going to have. Is that you have to play a certain amount of games before you're allowed to play overseas, or you're only allowed to play a certain amount of games before you cannot be selected. Like the selection policies of Wales and England are actually harming the teams. I think France is an interesting one because they have had players in the past play outside of France, like Raphael Ibanez, for example, played in England for a very long time while still playing for France. But I do think England's selection policy and Wales's selection policy, if we're talking about the Northern Hemisphere teams, are starting to have a negative impact on the ability of those teams to put the best players on the field. This debate's been had for well over 15 years now with England, and to a certain extent with Wales. Their own selection policies are actually now hurting them. So We shall see how things play out if the Welsh Union and the RFU do change their selection policies in years to come. But there have been some great players, English players who played in France, for example. The Armitage brothers and the Benjamin are the ones that come to mind, who basically said to the RFU, F you, we're going where we can earn the most money. And they were the best players in their positions at the time they went over there. There are some Welsh players who, could potentially be lost to the game. Reece Samet being one, but there are others who will follow suit. I have no doubt. The money is just not there. And this is a situation that, let's just get that right. This is a situation that rugby union in the professional era is now finding out. This was happening in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, where union players were going over to rugby league. And this is where several nations, Australia being one, were really keen to drive home the professional argument. They were losing their best players to league. Wales lost a lot of good players to league. I think England lost some players to rugby league as well because they could get paid, and they were classed as marquee signings. And then, while rugby league was professional, suddenly we have the Super League war, and the Super League's formed in the UK. We have the Australian Rugby League, formerly New South Wales Rugby League, and the Super League in Australia and New Zealand. And out of that, the wages in rugby league go through the roof. And at the same time, in order to fend off the potential of the big contracts in rugby league, rugby union turns professional. And I don't think what was the IRB at the time, which is now World Rugby, fully realised the implications of the wage structures they were putting in place at the time and the impacts that would eventually have. There is this misconception with a lot of people, a lot of sports fans don't realise how little professional rugby players of either code actually get paid on average compared to, let's say, a football player. Let's say we'll talk about European football here. How little they actually get paid. A lot of people don't realise they don't get paid anywhere near as much as you think. On average, you'll obviously have your Johnny Wilkinsons and your Dan Carters and your Johnny Sextons, who obviously are these well-known players that get paid a lot of money. But a lot of people do not realise the average salary is not as much as you think. An average salary, like a weekly wage for a Premier League football player, is an annual wage potentially for a top level, real top end rugby talent is a weekly wage for a Premier League football player. Still good money, but not as much as you think. I've been discussing Welsh sport and rugby union fans in particular, very toxic bunch, but no, not going great at the moment. Wooden spoon in the men's Six Nations, failing to make the Euros. Admittedly, the penalty shootout. But Welsh sport is not in a great place at the moment. We'll have to see how the Welsh women do in the Six Nations. I think they'll do better than the men. Just putting it out there, I think the Welsh women will do better than the men and won't get the wooden spoon. But yes, Welsh sport are not doing great at the moment. Obviously, Lewis Rees-Zammit has gone over to the NFL. So you could argue that Rees-Zammit's stories are positive as well as a negative if you're a rugby fan. But if you're an NFL fan, that could be a positive. It's creating headlines. It's creating discussion. So that could be quite an interesting one. So there's a positive and a negative there. But no, not making positive headlines. Poland has, I mean, that isn't great when no shots on target yet somehow. This is one of the negatives of football. Other team sports like ice hockey or Gaelic football, where there's a goal or field hockey, you're going to have a lot more shots, and so more shots are going to go on target. But this is one of the negative. This is where I think association football, soccer to the North Americans and the Aussies and the Kiwis, struggles, especially in North America, and to a certain extent in Australia, is sometimes, yeah, especially in a knockout game, in like World Cups and Euros and Champions Leagues and stuff, a team can go through without having a single shot on target. That does, yeah, that is a negative sometimes. And I think that is a head scratcher. Honestly, I have not watched any international football over the last week, over this last international break. Do you know why? Most of them were friendlies, and I don't have Channel 4 on demand, which are covering the home nations qualifiers, and I'm not watching the Welsh Poland game in Welsh. I will not. I mean, actually, to be fair, Welsh commentary is probably better than listening to some of the commentary that the BBC and ITV come up with. But I'm not a Welsh native speaker. I don't understand it, and so listening in Welsh would just, I would have to listen to it with no sound on. So there's that. But because it was only available on S4C, which is the Welsh version of the BBC, and so I'm not sure if there was the ability to get English commentary, but I mean, that was a competitive international. Yeah, we got given the England games, which were a 1-0 defeat to Brazil and a 2-2 against Belgium. Apparently, both performances were diabolical by England, and they deserved to lose both games. But friendlies, I don't watch international friendlies at all. Don't watch them at all because there's no meaning to them. And I've been meaning to do a video on how I would fix the international calendar when it comes to football. We have too many international breaks when it comes to football or soccer for those North American and Australian viewers that I have, because I know there'll be some viewers in North America and Australia and New Zealand who will watch this later on or maybe watching now, to avoid that kind of confusion. But I would do it this way. I would get rid of the Nations League, and I'll get rid of these international friendlies, and I would have World Cup, qualifying tournament, Euros, qualifying tournament, World Cup, in that kind of cycle every summer. So that's your international window, is technically the club off season. Therefore, you don't have these international breaks in the club season, which means every European league can have that true winter break. And you don't get fixture congestion where you're having to have international break, which means you can have actual replays again in the FA Cup. Who knew? But that's how I would do it. I would get rid of the friendlies and make every other summer the qualifying tournament for the following tournament, which would be a Euros or a World Cup. That is how I would do it. The problem is that in South America and Africa, every 2 years they have a tournament. Well, I think in South America it's every year, but basically South America and Africa don't work on the same cycle as Europe, basically, because the African Cup of Nations is every 2 years. So in a World Cup year, you'll have an AFCON, and in a Euros year, you'll have an AFCON. So there is that issue there, but that's how I would basically fix the international calendar. I would get rid of the Nations League. I would just have qualifiers, tournament, qualifiers, tournament in that cycle every off season. It's the CONMEBOL qualifying that does first place get trophies, 18 going half early. Look, that's how I would potentially do it. CONMEBOL, you could split it one year, one the other year. In a World Cup cycle, I don't know how you're going to do it. Or you use the South American version of the Euros as their qualifying tournament for the World Cup. I watched the England under-21s at Bolton Stadium, which was better than the England senior team. Is that rain outside? Oh no, it's just really windy. I thought it was hammering. Well, it is raining, but quite gusty outside. Um, I didn't think the last World Cup was terrible. I thought it was good, but I still think other World Cups were better. Um, I felt the last Euros was actually pretty good, considering that UEFA have said they won't do a pan continental tournament ever again. But now FIFA have gone, we're going to do that in 2030. I am looking forward to this summer's Euros in what is it, 3 months away, 3-4 months away. I am looking forward to it, but at the same time, I have my reservations about certain aspects, especially VAR and the best third place teams qualifying. I'm still not sold on that format. But I think it's going to be a very open Euros. I don't think there's a true favourite for these Euros. And there's a lot of speculation about certain, managers being under pressure, certain nations being under pressure, certain players being under pressure for, performances. So it's going to be interesting. The under-21s, this is what's very interesting, is some players do really well in the age grades, like from under 18s, under 19s, under 20s, 21s, under 23s, depending on the sport, and then they don't kick on at senior level, or they just leave the sport entirely. Famously, when Mario Lemieux, NHL player, was drafted in the mid 80s, one of his teammates on the junior team he was on, I think, was very highly rated, and I think outscored him for goals and points and assists. And then he left the sport entirely and became a police officer. Yeah, had equally as good stats as Mario Lemieux, decided at the age of 18, 19, 20 to give up playing ice hockey and became a police officer. And quite apparently had a very good career in the state or provincial police in Quebec and then the federal police in Canada. Are the British bad at penalties? No, I wouldn't say so. I think that's a misnomer that the press likes to go on about. You look at the amount of penalty shootouts we have in league and FA Cup games and football league trophies and FA vases and stuff like that when it gets to latter stages of those competitions and in finals. We've had British clubs in European knockout games. And we've had an all-English final in the Champions League, and I think in 2008 in Moscow, which went to a penalty shootout, and most of the penalty takers were English players. I wouldn't say so. No, I think a lot of spotlight is put on the few examples we have in international football when it comes to penalty shootouts. Apparently, we're terrible. No, I do think the press, the sports, the media. This is something that I'm kind of glad I have my own YouTube channel, but I do think as time has gone on, the sports media is becoming just as toxic as the rest of the mainstream media as time has gone on, and as more things come out with investigative journalism and document. The Paul Gascoigne documentary sums up the toxic nature of the relationship between sport and the mainstream media, which I think is pretty similar to sport and social media, or the new media. But I don't necessarily think we're bad. I mean, we invented the bloody sport and we invented the penalty shootout. I mean, is it the best way to decide a game? Who knows? But I do think the media likes to put a certain spin on it. There's a lot of... Is there a lot of negativity in the mainstream media? I think there is to a certain extent. But look, Wales lost in a penalty shootout, but they lost to a team that didn't have a shot on target. So then you have to start asking questions of the Welsh setup, tactics. You should not be getting knocked out by a team that can't get a shot on target in 2 hours of play. Oh, look, I've seen some cracking 0-0 draws or scoring draws in my time watching football. I've seen some cracking back in the day when every round of the FA Cup went to a replay. If you could not get a win in the 90 minutes, I've seen some cracking scoring draws, and I've seen some really bad, games won in 90 minutes. I've seen some really bad 1 and 2-0 kind of games, or a close, scrappy game, and I've seen some really entertaining 0-0s. Of course, look, Lewandowski, he's obviously, he's at the tail end of his career now. Not long left, but he's had a fantastic career. But I do think Lewandowski has underperformed in a Poland shirt. For all his ability, he has underperformed in a Poland shirt. And some other really good Polish players have underperformed for the national side over many years. This isn't just a Lewandowski thing. This is a Poland-wide thing. Poland haven't really hit the heights that they did in the 80s and the 70s. In the 70s and 80s, Poland had a fantastic national side. Since Romania in the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s, they were fantastic at international level. Some great players, and haven't really continued that legacy. No, they haven't. As a nation, they have massively underperformed for a generation now. When they co-hosted the Euros, for example, they didn't perform particularly well. There was a lot of criticism aimed at that team. Lewandowski was part of that team. We'll see what happens. I mean, look what Greece did in 2004, 20 years ago. Greece were not expected to win a game. They went on and won the tournament. Now, yes, they did play a very structured, grinding style of play, but it was effective. And there was a reason for that. They played to their strengths, which were organisation and fitness. They weren't the most skilled side, but they were very well drilled. They were very fit, and they were very organised. So they managed to win. They had a very simple game plan, and they had a very rigid, I wouldn't say rigid structure, but the players knew their role. They were a sum of their parts, and they were really well coached. They had a very good system, but they did have some good players in that side. People think that Greece side that won in 2004 was terrible. It wasn't. It actually had some very good players. They had a bit of pace in that side as well. But what they were very good at was they were all pretty experienced at the same time. They had a lot of experience of club games played and international caps played. They had a very experienced goalkeeper. They had a very experienced back four and a very, very solid workman-like high-energy midfield. So they were actually quite a good side. But when you were talking about superstar players, didn't have any superstars. Georgios Samaras was a bit of a clutch player. But he could score key goals at key times. But they were very good at the press. They were very, very well organised. You never saw them out of position. They played a very well-structured, high-energy defensive style, and it won. They backed their defence. They had the best defence in the competition. Generally, one of the top 3 teams in a competition defensively will win. Do I think Brendan Rodgers will go back into English football management? It depends what kind of offer comes his way. It all depends on the offer that comes his way, and would he be happy to be back under the spotlight, considering his time at Liverpool, and admittedly he had a decent spell at Leicester, but towards the end sort of fell off a cliff. But he had a decent spell at Swansea. Liverpool, Leicester and Swansea, he had decent spells, especially at Leicester, where he actually won some silverware, but didn't work at Liverpool. So, but I think it's look again. The media likes to spin things, and you can't. I mean, look how many trophies can actually be won per season, and how many clubs are actually competing for said trophies. It's the way there's a lot going on with football at the moment. Away from what happens on the pitch, and it's all to do with the financial rules. I mean, we've just seen Nottingham Forest hit with a points deduction, which could implicate and impact the relegation fight. Everton are facing further charges. Leicester, his old club, are facing potential punishment at the start of next season, which could impact potentially the end of this season. We just don't know. Then there's Chelsea and Man City and their ongoing saga. Will they actually get punished? And a lot of football fans have no faith in the Premier League and the FA to actually punish Man City and Chelsea because they've got away with so much in the past. Well, this is the Football League and the Premier League basically saying, look, we're cleaning house. We're starting to enforce our rules and change our rules before the regulator comes in. The regulator that the Premier League or the Big Six are resisting. And that's because they've been allowed to get away with so much. There's been weak governance for 3-4 decades. And the result of that is the clubs behave in a way that they think they're untouchable. Now, some clubs have had point deductions in the past and had administrations. And they do need to look at the administration rules, and they do need to look at the director's test, because the Reading situation is Reading. Reading is Bury on steroids. And I live not too far from Reading's training ground. I work with a lot of diehard Reading fans. I even work with a Wycombe fan. Now, Wycombe, their ownership group have been involved with the potential purchase of the training ground, which is complicated, and we know what's going to happen. That's going to be developed to houses, let's be honest. But I scrap parachute payments. I don't know that parachute payments is the problem. What I think is the problem is the clubs have basically been allowed. It's been the Wild West in regards to the governance side of things. It's been the Wild West because the governance has been so weak, because the amount of money within. I mean, Leeds, for example, are the 16th most valuable football club in the world. They're not a Premier League club at the moment. They haven't been a successful club for a very long time. But Leeds are worth a lot of money. Leeds' revenue and Leeds United, the fan base, it's worth a lot of money. They have not been successful for over 34 years. But no, Leeds were badly run. They were spending money like it was going out of fashion in real terms. Man City and Chelsea are two different situations. We knew this was going to happen at Nottingham Forest because they basically replaced their entire squad in 3 weeks. Look, the Championship again is all over the place. I'm a Blackburn fan. Our run into the end of the season is we're going to get relegated. Let's be honest. But we've got the second lowest wage bill in the entire league and wage budget. But some of the clubs are spending. I mean, some clubs have had their spending constrained because otherwise they'll be in breach of these new spending profit loss rules that the Football League and Premier League have brought in. Otherwise, they're going to be facing points deductions, so they can't spend any money. So that aspirational side of thing is gone. I wouldn't necessarily scrap parachute payments, but I think the way that the TV deal, the way that the rules are being, well, it seems to be arbitrarily, we're going to punish this club and that club and this club and that. It's a mess. Yeah, but when we're talking about points deductions, potentially deciding a relegation battle for the first time since 1998, where there was precedence there with a different points deduction. I think it was Bolton. Was it Bolton? Yes, it was Bolton, I think. who were unable to fulfil a fixture. And there was a club relegated where they got a 2 or 3 point deduction because there was an outbreak of flu within the squad or something, and they went down. I think it was Bolton. I can't be certain, but I think it was Bolton. I think it was in the late 90s. And that was the last time the relegation battle was decided by a points deduction. The Portsmouth points deduction, they would have got relegated anyway. It wasn't going to impact the actual end of the season. It just made it almost completely impossible for them to stay up. Well, but I am concerned with all these points deductions in all the leagues. I think we need to look at separating the owners from what happens on the field. I think we need to look at the ownership rules, directors' tests. The fit and proper persons test is the biggest joke going, quite frankly. Absolute farce of a piece of administration. It's a joke because a lot of these owners should be known they're a football club. I think we need to definitely look at bringing in spending caps and salary caps for each league. I think promoted teams should be given some leeway in regards to spending. Allow them a season or two to establish themselves if they don't get relegated. But that would have to be a FIFA-led decision and a UEFA-led decision. But I am concerned the direction the sport is taking. There are a lot more clubs in financial difficulty than are publicly known. This is, I think, the pandemic and the shutdown and the playing in front of no fans and not be able to complete League One and League Two seasons and all this palaver over the last 4 years, I think has accelerated the financial issues the sport faces. I think it has exposed the money bubbles burst. Basically, let's be honest. What we're seeing with association football, especially, but other sports as well, but association football. We'll just talk about football, European football. I'm going to compare it to the financial crash of the late 2000s, from 2008 to 2010, the subprime mortgage crisis. Basically, people were spending money they didn't have on cheap credit. And then there was a shortage of financial liquidity in the market. And people were lent money they shouldn't have been lent. People were spending money they didn't have. And suddenly we have a situation where, in this case, we'll say Bury, here we go, 2019. So I'm comparing it like Lehman Brothers on the stock exchange and the banking system in the US. Bury Football Club goes bust in 2019. And no one pays attention to a small club. So I would say Northern Rock here in England, in the UK, is a bank. No one really pays much attention. It's a small fry, it's a small fish in a big pond. Fast forward a few years, look what's happening. We've got clubs under investigation all over the place, points deductions, administrations looming, winding up petitions. We've got Nuneaton Borough's gone out of business in the non-league, Torquay's about to appoint administrators. We've got a couple of clubs right against the wall with winding up petitions from HM Revenue and Customs. Reading are all over the place. That's a given. Derby nearly go out of business. Bolton nearly go out of business. Macclesfield did go out of business. And we're talking clubs that have been in the higher levels of the Football League and in the Premier League. Yes, and yeah, Bury have won things. So yes, they do have history. They do have still a trophy cabinet. And this is what's scary. Historically, a successful club, obviously not in recent times, but historically. But what it basically sums up is that should not have happened. The Football League allowed it to happen by passing the ownership as fit and proper. And so this is where football fans have lost faith in the governing bodies. And this has been a culmination of things over a long period of time. The TV deal comes in for the Premier League and the Champions League and the big European leagues. The TV deals come in. France doesn't have a TV deal anymore. It's now worth nothing. 10 live games a year shown to the domestic French audience. I'm not sure on their international deal for overseas, but domestically, not great. We've got clubs across Europe, not just in the UK, but across Europe, over the last 10 to 15, 20 years, that have basically are financially buggered. We've had several TV companies collapse. Setanta and ITV Digital obviously spring to mind here in the UK, but there's been some in Europe as well. And TV deals become worthless. And yeah, some big clubs have had Valencia, Parma, in Spain and Italy. Deportivo La Coruña, they're in the 3rd division of Spanish football now. They're completely buggered. Bordeaux, another one, buggered. These are clubs that have won silverware. These are clubs that have been very, very competitive at the top level, played in Europe on domestic trophies, etc., etc. They're buggered. We have got corruption scandals, either involving individual players or individual clubs or individual club officials to whole leagues. There's too much money concentrated in a very select group of individuals and clubs. We've seen the Super League debacle. We've seen the restructuring of the Champions League, which is Super League light. So fans have become apathetic. We've seen attendance issues at games, which doesn't get talked about. Does not get talked about in the way that it should. You've got actual and paid. So the corporate seats, basically. We have seen issues with attendance. We've seen the 5th round, for some reason, in the FA Cup suddenly becomes a midweek round from Monday through to Thursday, which I hate. Got no time for that. Do not like it. Fans don't like it. Fans don't turn up for it. Empty seats all over the shop. Let's be clear. We've just had an international break. We're talking about this fixture congestion. And the new European club formats for the European competitions, how they're going to be structured, add even more fixtures to an already congested calendar. We haven't even discussed the player welfare aspects of this and the various players collapsing on the pitch, the amount of injuries going up. They've made the substitution rule change where you've got 5 subs, but you can only use them in 3 slots, which I think is ridiculous. I think you should have. We don't need 5 subs, but FIFA for you. We've seen a lot of rule changes with like the VAR. We've got potential rule changes with the blue card and sim binning for players, and basically trying to copy both codes of rugby and ice hockey, basically where the naughty player goes in the naughty box for a little bit and has to think about what they've done. Yeah, that's not fixing the actual problems with the game, with corruption and player agents being unregulated potentially and not well regulated, lack of transparency, transfer fees being ridiculous and staggered payments that don't ever get fully paid. What the economics of the sport is built upon debt. Then we've got Infantino at FIFA making some really bizarre statements. And I don't think he's taking the sport down a very good direction and path. They've expanded the World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. Bearing in mind the time they're going to be playing, that's going to be the hottest time of year in the US, Canada, and Mexico. We're talking 40 plus degrees Celsius heat in some locations, even 50 degrees Celsius in some locations. Let that sink in. Expanded tournament, more games. I think the World Cup after that, they're going to be playing in 6 countries. Also, that Saudi Arabia can get a World Cup, 2 World Cups down the line. Yeah, I can see the Euros becoming a 32-team comp, but That I don't mind as much because I think Europe has the quality players and quality depth to make that a really entertaining tournament for Europe. And that will sell globally because the best players play in Europe. So yeah, I can understand the playing aspect and the commercial aspect for that. But is that the right way to go? That's a lot of that's more games to be played in a very short time frame to fit in. So it's still going to be a good tournament. There's no denying that. But who's going to want to host that tournament? Because the cost, you're seeing a lot more co-hosting now. Spread the cost. So the cost of hosting. You could argue that, yes. You could basically have head-to-heads. I think is there like 64 or 65 nations in Europe or something? Just have nations play off against each other. Winner goes through, loser misses out, goes to a playoff to get through. The qualifying tournament format would be really interesting, actually. Really, really interesting format for qualification, which would be very, very short, and which ultimately means less games, which means less international breaks. And okay, so if it's 55, that could be a very interesting qualification format, yes. Be a little round robin, and then certain nations will have a second chance to get through and then a third chance to get through. So it makes sense to win games, which will then put more emphasis on winning your game rather than getting a draw. Like groups of three, like a round robin, and you want to win your games, you're straight through, and then the other two have to play off against each other again, or they go into like a hat to then play off. It basically makes sense to win. So that means 23 nations miss out. That's interesting. Or a playing round to get to the next stage of qualifying. Makes it interesting, yes. How you would structure that, 11 groups of 5, potentially. Actually, yeah, 11 groups of 5. That's the only way you can do it. 11 groups of 5. So that's every group's even, and you get your 32 out of that. You get your top 2 of each group. That'd be 22, and then the other 10 out of the teams that miss out be kind of like a round robin, and potentially out of that you might have to have another mini tournament with like a playoff kind of thing. Wales have a better chance of making the Euros and the World Cup. That's fact. They've qualified for more Euros than World Cups. It's easier to qualify. But I can see that kind of format where you have 11 groups of 5. Your top 2 from each group qualifies. That makes 22. You need to get 10 more. Out of those 11 groups of 5, so you would have 33 nations left or something. Is that 11 groups of 5? Yeah, 33 nations left. 22 have qualified. That's not 11 groups of 3. Or some groups of 6, some of 7. And like a second qualification. Basically, it makes sense to win your games. It puts more emphasis on winning rather than getting draws, so you're going to put more effort in. Allegedly. But we've seen so many dead rubbers when it comes to group stages and pool matches where it's neither side wants to lose, so they play for a draw. The intensity isn't there, and it's a bit of a lethargic game. And then if it's like a knockout kind of thing where like winner takes all, you can sometimes get a cagey game. What I think, there needs to be some jeopardy. Win, you qualify. Lose, you're out. Draw, you put yourself into like a weird kind of grey area. I think it makes an emphasis on winning your games. One defeat could be curtains for a qualification campaign. If you're going to expand to 32, which I think is very likely within the next couple of Euros, there'll be an expansion. On the commercial aspect, I can understand UEFA doing it. But then you were going to have to look at how they've structured the Champions League and Europa League and go, we need to restructure this. If we're going to have an expanded Euros, we need to restructure the club game and have less club games. And that would mean what makes UEFA more money? The Euros and the internationals, or the club games? What actually is more profitable? But no, Wales have a far better chance of qualifying for the Euros, the World Cup. They've only qualified for 2 World Cups. They qualified, I think, for 3 Euros. 32 format is a better format than 24. Look, it worked. I think it was the perfect format for any tournament. It was the perfect format for the World Cup. Because now we know that the next World Cup is going to be expanded. And it will work for the Euros as well. Because the World Cup used to have the 2014 format, with what we currently have with the Euros didn't really work. And so, yes, but I can see UEFA going for a 32-team format, which makes the qualifying really interesting. 11 groups of 5 qualifying, and then out of that, the third place teams, the 11 groups, will be the ones where you're going to have one of them miss out, because you need to get 10 more teams out of 11 groups. So there's that. Euro 2048, the best 48 teams. From the sounds of it, be all of Europe by that point. But no, I think at some point we are going to see UEFA contemplate expanding the Euros and expanding the amount of teams at said Euros. I don't disagree with that. I think it makes sense. The qualification format is going to be interesting, because you'll have the top 2 from each group, which will be 11 groups of 5. As I say, that makes 22 teams. Then you've got to find the other 10 from 11 groups. It's not hard. They are, yes, San Marino are actually starting to get a bit better. Yeah, I mean, look, at some point you're going to get a couple of San Marino's players, or those who qualify for San Marino, playing in the Italian, potentially the Swiss league systems, who get to play at a high level, who could potentially help improve the quality of the team. But we're having this debate about Andorra and Liechtenstein and Luxembourg, and they actually do win games. So they're getting there slowly but surely. And, you know, it's going to take that 1 or 2 or 3 young players in an academy at an Italian club or a Swiss club, because that's where they're going to end up, playing a decent level, professional, who gets noticed by a bigger club. And then suddenly the conversation changes. And the quality level changes. So we'll see. Yeah, look, when I was a kid, Georgia, the Georgians had a couple of good players, and one of them was called Thomas Ketsbayer, played for Newcastle, and he was a lunatic of a player. Very angry man. Ketsbayer, a bit before your time. Ukraine have always had decent players. Even going back to the Soviet Union, that Soviet side of the 80s, most of it played for Dynamo Kiev. So there's that. And they were really scary side in the 80s and 90s. But countries like Georgia, it's a difficult one, because rugby union is their national sport. So football isn't their national sport. More people play rugby union in Georgia than football. And so their best athletes are football players. And you look at the history of football in the former Soviet Union, Georgia didn't produce a lot of players for the national Soviet side. and the investment and infrastructure just really isn't there. So for a country like Georgia to finally get to it, that's a positive. It's like when Latvia qualified 20 years ago, or when Greece actually won 20 years ago. This is the positivity you want to see at international in any sport, is those new nations or those up and coming nations qualifying for the first time in a while, or for the first time ever. That is a positive. But you're still going to see the same nations up at the top in the latter stages of the tournament. Yes, I would say Latvia was more impressive 20 years ago when they qualified, but they did have some good players at the time. And their greatest ever player is obviously Marian Pajas, and I do believe he was still playing in 2004 when they qualified. Famously played for Southampton for many years. But I mean, Finland, obviously, Iceland are the feel-good stories we've had in recent tournaments, with them qualifying for World Cups and Euros and being part of the discussion, and having decent tournaments. I mean, Iceland have made knockout stages in international tournaments, so that's where we're at the moment. But no, Marian Pajas, I've actually seen him play in the flesh, and he had a lot of injuries, which hampered his ability. I think he was a brilliant player, but injuries hampered his career. I think is a fair way to look at Marian Pajas and his impact on not just the English game, but his impact on football. He was a brilliant player, but injuries hampered things. You wanted Kazakhstan to qualify for the Borat memes. Yeah. Again, football in Kazakhstan, you'll find ice hockey is more popular and better funded and has better structures. And Kazakhstan is a very, like, some of these former Soviet republics that are more in Asia and further east are very interesting, because they're either very, very mountainous, or they're like Kazakhstan, which is just flat, like Ukraine, and it's just desert and steppe, and there's nothing. And they're very sparsely populated. Yeah, look, it's more political. It's more political. Kazakhstan is one of those transcontinental countries, like Turkey, as well, and the three countries in the Caucasus, like Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. These are Turkey's political a little bit, but it is very European leaning rather than Asiatic leaning in its politics and its economy. Some of these countries are on geographical and political crossroads between Asia and Europe historically. Basically, their class is the old world. They're not truly European, they're not truly Asian, so it's a weird one. Israel is the one that a lot of people raise an eyebrow at, being allowed to participate in UEFA session competitions, but that is purely political. There's no geography in that at all. That is, the Arab nations didn't want to play with them, and they couldn't guarantee their security in about half of Asia. They're not overly popular with the rest of Asia. Is the state of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu's right wing government, but that's another thing. Keep politics out of it. But yeah, this is where sport and politics collides. Kazakhstan, because of the Soviet Union. What about Africa? Egypt is the only one that's technically transcontinental, because the Sinai is in Asia, but they've tried to sort of include Morocco at times, and hinted at Morocco playing in UEFA competitions and the Moroccan clubs. And they've got a very well structured league in Morocco that's highly competitive, actually. It's really entertaining. But Morocco is the most European leaning African state because of its links with France and Spain. I'm not even, no, there's too many Arabic countries in North Africa, they would not have that. I think it only was until like 2000 or something that Egypt recognised Israel as a state as part of the Camp David Accords that Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat, and I forget who the Israeli Prime Minister was at the time, with the Camp David meetings in the late 90s, but it wasn't until then that Egypt finally recognised the state of Israel. So that would have been a bit tricky. And Gaddafi was still Libya's boss. So that really would have been awkward. I think Algeria and Tunisia not so much. I think it would have been more Libya and Egypt and some of the other countries in North Africa, or the Sahara being a bit difficult. No, well, again, Israel is a really complex political situation, and I try and keep the politics off this channel, but this is where sport and politics collide, where Israel is admitted to UEFA competitions and other European competitions because of the political and security aspect of the situation that is currently going on and previously has gone on since 1948. But yeah, Israel being UEFA sanctioned nation and a UEFA governed nation in regards to football is political motivation. That's basically it. But on a playing standpoint, no, they haven't done much in some time. They've had some decent players like Yossi Benayoun and Tal Ben Hayim. They're two players that spring to mind that played in the Premier League in recent years. Maccabi Tel Aviv, and there was another club that's is it Haifa? Maccabi Haifa? There's a couple of clubs that have played in Champions League and Europa League football from Israel and have qualified for the group stages in recent times. But yeah, it would be interesting to see Maccabi Haifa. Yeah, I was right. It would be interesting to see how Israel would do at a Euros or a World Cup. If they were to qualify, it'd be like one of those first-time nations qualifying, or it would be interesting to see how they would compare against a South American nation or an African nation or another Asian nation, let's say Japan or Korea, for example, the superpowers of Asian football, or Australia, for example. It would be interesting to see how they would stand up against a Central American nation like Mexico or Costa Rica, who are pretty decent. And try and find a comparable level of other nations at a similar level to them. I don't think they have. I think there was a period where they weren't able to compete at international level politically. The Orlando Pirates, is that Major League Soccer? I'm not sure then. Didn't they finish runner-up in the U20s World Cup a few years ago? We're talking about senior level. I don't think they've qualified for a major tournament. I don't think they ever have. I can't think of them doing so, unless they've played at the Asia Cup, but the Asia version of the Euros. But even then, they're a UEFA. No, I don't think they have. They never played at Euros and they never played a World Cup, so that I'm aware of. Now, in saying that, it would be interesting to see how they would perform at a major tournament. So if the Euros was expanded to a 32-team competition, which looks very likely to happen at some point in the next couple of cycles, it would be interesting to see how they would perform should they get there, because it would be easier to qualify. But they haven't produced decent, talented players for a while. They're not. There's no Israeli players that I could name right now. The two players I named best, Yossi Benayoun and Tal Ben Hayim, are long since retired. They haven't played in the Premier League at least for a while. So it'll be, as I say, it'll be interesting to see if they started producing some youth talent, and then that talent plays across Europe, potentially in South America, but plays across Europe. It'd be interesting to see how the team would evolve. But the problem is you've got compulsory military service, which means all young men and most young women end up in the military at some point for I think it was, is it 2 or 3 year stint or something. So that takes them out of the ability of playing, because being an athlete is not a protected job as far as I'm aware. So that means they have to do their military service, very similar to South Korea, and some other countries where you have to do your compulsory military. I think that was actually, I think Israel and Palestine playing a friendly was muted at one point as a way of making peace, and that kind of political, using sport as a political tool to political diplomacy, sporting diplomacy. I think that was actually suggested at one point, is that a Palestinian team play an Israeli team in a friendly match, as a way of helping the peace process. That has, I think, been suggested in the past. That's not actually a crazy idea. It wouldn't be happening at the moment, but it's not a crazy idea. But then again, East Germany famously beat West Germany in the 1974 World Cup. And I believe the last international East Germany played was actually against West Germany, and the East Germans won 1-0. So there is that. That's just something that strikes me as we have seen it happen before. But it would be like at the height of the Vietnam War, the USA playing Vietnam, for example, or England obviously did play Argentina in 1986 in the World Cup, not long after the Falklands War. So there was that. No, the East Germans weren't overly successful. They did have some good players though, but they weren't overly as successful as the East German government would have hoped. There is a I've seen several documentaries about the state-sponsored doping at the Olympics throughout the 70s and 80s. And former East German athletes are basically suing the German government basically for the health impacts that the former East German government put them through and all that. There's basically these former East German athletes, both men and women, have had multiple health and mental health and physical health issues in the years following basically the doping program. But this was more aimed at the Olympic athletes rather than the football players. But and they're obviously seeking redress and compensation and assistance from the German state. Yes, apparently North Korea are the best team ever. They win every game 10-0. Yeah. I remember the 2010 World Cup when they qualified, and that hammering. I think, was it Portugal, Brazil, like thumped them many goals to 0. But yeah, it's like North and South Korea playing an international match. Like the idea, yeah, it was 7-0 something, and Ronaldo had a very good game apparently. But no, it is almost like North and South Korea agreeing to a football match in a neutral location, and the result being a draw, and it's all nice and friendly. We're all shaking hands, and no one's defecting to the other side. But I think East and West Germany only played each other twice, and East Germany won both games. Is it allowed that they play each other? If both were to qualify for a World Cup and they were to meet in the knockout stages, I can't see why it isn't. They compete against each other at the Olympics and in the individual and team events. North Korean, South Korean athletes have competed as a joint team at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics ice hockey. The ice hockey were joint teams. So efforts have been made at times. Well, in qualifying, I know the US have played Iran at a couple of World Cups over the years. I think the US have actually lost both games as well. Yeah, South Sudan versus Sudan. I mean, it's like Ethiopia playing Eritrea. I mean, there's political ramifications for that because Ethiopia used to own Eritrea, and there was a war of independence, and that's a bit messy. I mean, look, there are some really highly politicized and games where the security aspect is a bit tasty. Regardless, I mean, it's like, Germany playing Poland, for example. There's still that aspect of the rivalry between the nations historically, and of course what happened during World War II with Poland and Germany. And it's not Poland Russia. They doesn't is tasty. I think I always wondered what happened to that North Korean team after the World Cup in 2010. I know the team in 1966. There was no ramifications because the team in '66 did quite well. Because the team in '66 made the knockout stages and actually were well received by the locals because they were based up in Middlesbrough. I watched a documentary about the North Korean team of 1966, and then I can't remember when it was, but the surviving members of the team were allowed back to Middlesbrough to visit where they'd stayed and all that, and they were welcomed quite warmly when they went back. Oh yeah, the propaganda machine. I mean, look, we all know about the cult of personality and how dictatorships use propaganda to. It's like the Zaire team of 1974. Were terrified that they were all going to be shot when they caught. It's yeah. But we're all having a laugh about this, but there's some serious consequences, in regards to some of these brutal dictatorships and what happens to the players and their families. Like this is serious stuff. I mean, there were allegations in the 1978 World Cup in regards to intimidation that the dictatorship in Peru had an agreement with the dictatorship, for example, in Argentina, and there was intimidation. They were threatening, players and such. There was some real brutality going on in South America in the 60s and 70s and 80s in regards to pretty brutal dictatorships, military dictatorships in South America that were brutalizing their citizens and just political dissent. And it was borne out with how South Americans play their football. They play with great skill and great flair, but they're also exceptionally violent. Well, a Copa America where both CONCACAF and CONMEBOL join together to have a joint kind of tournament similar to the Euros would make it better. Yes. It would help grow the game in North America more because you've got your Brazils, your Argentinas, your Uruguays, your Colombias, your Perus, your Chiles playing against the US and Canada more regularly. And some of the best players in the world are from South America. Yes, they play in their club football in Europe, a lot of them, but a lot of them still play in South America, but they play at a higher quality than the MLS. That will no doubt, in my mind, improve the quality of the US and Canadian teams even more, and help grow the game even more. Because you're the likes of the next Messi, for example, even though Messi's now playing in the MLS, but the next Messi, the next Maradona, the next, Ronaldo Nazario, the next Kaká is going to come out of South America, and they're going to be a superstar. And, while the club game in South America is not quite what it was 20, 30 years ago, there's still a lot of really top quality players playing in South America. And the game, the skill level is unmatched. It's like Canadians with ice hockey, they start playing at like 3-4 years old. It's like rugby league and AFL in Australia, they start playing at like 3-4 years old. Football in South America, they start playing in the streets at 3 or 4 years old. And the South American football leagues are signed already. Yeah, of course they are. I've watched many a live South American game. Admittedly, watching in Portuguese and Spanish commentary, which is hilarious because their commentators are mental. But the quality level, the entertainment level is up there. The stadiums are ramshackle and falling apart, but the skill level and the aggressive defending, and the games are so open. It's really interesting. It's really fun to watch because you just don't know what's going to come next. Will there be another Messi? I think one with Messi and Ronaldo and to a certain extent some of the other players in the last 15, 20 years, I think the quality level has been less in the last 15, 20 years than what it was before. So they stand out more as players. They're playing a generation earlier, they don't stand out as much. But this generation of players is not the same as the previous generation of players and talent. The previous generation had so many quality players that it was harder to stand out as the greatest player. Whereas this current generation, as it is, has been dominated by 2 or 3 players because they stand out more because the competitive nature of the game is less. Oh, so you went to an ice hockey game for the first time and you went, oh, wow, this is cheap. Yes. There's a reason why ice hockey is very affordable. There isn't a great TV deal. And the wages aren't astronomical because there isn't that TV deal. Because there's not as much money coming into the game can't afford to pay the players as well as football, rugby union, rugby league. And so things are far more reasonably priced because the running costs are less. It's an experience when you go to your first ever, or if you haven't been for a long time, it is an experience when you're inside an ice hockey arena because there's a massive 200-foot long, 60-foot wide ice surface or 80-foot wide or whatever it is there. So you've got a lot of frozen water on concrete, and that's going to really give out a lot of cold. You're basically in a giant fridge. It's the best way to describe it. Some of the smaller arenas, it is like being inside an ice cooler at a super. The big warehouses when you have the ice freezers and you go in and you can only be in there. It is an experience if you're new to it and you haven't. I haven't been to a game for 4 years, so when I next go to a game, I'll be a little bit. Oh, fuck me, it's cold. The best way to describe it, but no, the best way to describe it is you have to wrap up. People think, it's an indoor event. Yes, the ice surface is going to be cold, but it's not going to be that cold inside. I can wear a thin jumper, like a hoodie like this, and just a t-shirt underneath. No, you have to wrap up a little bit. I remember I took my mum once, and she actually wore like a proper Soviet-style hat with the flaps, and she wore a scarf. She looked ridiculous. and she was like, she wasn't prepared for how cold it was going to be, and it does, yeah, you get used to it. Like when I used to go, I used to wear a t-shirt, hoodie, and then my hockey jersey on the top. And I would always wear my beanie. I would always wear a beanie or a baseball cap, something on my head, and a snood. So I was actually like I was dressed for winter outside. Now, the more modern arenas and the bigger arenas in the higher levels of the game in Europe and in North America will have climate control. But you will never see anyone wearing a t-shirt at an ice hockey match or a hockey match, depending where you are, where you are in the world. You'll never see anyone wear a t-shirt inside, unless they're seriously on the sauce and they're starting to get their top. You won't. It because of the cold playing surface. That sort of like has an air conditioning effect. Oh yeah, if you're new to the sport, and as soon as they find out it is your first hockey game, you're going to get so many fans basically hockey explain things to you, and there's a lot of, I would say, a lot of fans are really glad that a new fan has come in or a new spectator has come in to absorb and watch and learn about the sport. And I always find that no two fans are the same. But I found hockey fans to be, or ice hockey fans, but I'm very used to North Americanisms now. I find them to be like the best. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are ice hockey fans as well, and this is before we even knew each other. Like we just became friends, and then we found out we're hockey fans. This is kind of cool. So, like, and I find that when we're having conversations, we'll have that same fan banter that we would have if you're football fans or rugby league fans or rugby union fans, where we're like slagging off each other's teams and, oh, how are you doing this season? Oh, your season's a bit of a disaster. We have that same kind of friendly, tongue-in-cheek, wind up your mate kind of banter. But at the same time, when it comes to serious incidents like player suspensions and, things like that, where there's a big talking point, there's been a big controversial incident, that it does get people talking. Even if it happens in a league that you don't have a team in. Now, every hockey fan has an NHL team they follow. There's been a few incidents in the NHL where I think it was Shane Pinto who got suspended for half the season for breaching the betting rules. Yet, and this was a question that was asked earlier about the amount of betting sponsorship and betting breaches in professional sport that have been happening in recent years. He was suspended for half a season. It's 41 regular season games for the Ottawa Senators for betting breaches. Very similar to the Ivan Toney situation, where he gets a similar length ban, basically half a season. And the irony is that the amount of betting sponsorship in professional sport. But no, I find, especially in ice hockey, though, most fans are pretty cool, especially to newer fans of the game, and trying to grow the game. Most fans are pretty cool. Oh yeah, I mean, the TV deal in Canada, there's a big debate about it because Rogers, which owns Sportsnet, is not going to be bidding for the next TV rights deal. It's going to go to TSN. TSN has less money than Rogers, but Rogers, who owns Sportsnet, have been losing a lot of money. And so the media landscape in Canada, the TV deal in Canada is worth a fair bit. Not as much as the US TV deal, mind. But it's there's a when the next TV deal rights are up for negotiation, that's going to be really interesting because the NHL is going to get less money from the Canadian broadcasters because TSN will not put as much money on the table because they don't have as much money as Rogers behind them. but Rogers, which owns Sportsnet, has been losing money. A lot of sports broadcasters and TV broadcasters have been networks have been losing money. This is a continuing trend. There are some exceptions, but there is a noticeable trend in I think that the TV rights package that sports has is going to plateau at some point, and we're very, very close to it maxing out. And with the rise of Netflix now, I know Netflix have got the Jake Paul Tyson fight in the summer. Which nation's the best? Is Canada. Canada. The Soviets, for a period, basically won everything in the 70s and 80s at the Olympic level because the Red Army team was basically professional. But Canada, by a long, long way. Although that dominance, Canada's in ice hockey is turning into the Brazil of football, where they are the most successful overall all time, but they're not being as successful lately at the World Juniors and the World Championships and at the Olympics. Their dominance is starting to wane a little bit, and the Scandinavian nations like Finland and Sweden, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the US, and the Swiss, and even the Baltic states like Latvia, for example, there's been a shift, and some other nations have massively improved, like France, Italy, and the UK. There's now a shift in the balance of power a little bit, and that's because of other nations developing more players, including ourselves. Yes, Great Britain are at the top tier of the World Championships. We will be playing in the World Championships top division in May, 2 months' time, month and a half's time. But yeah, Great Britain have actually, well, the UK has actually won gold medals and silver medals at the Olympics. So there's that. Historically, back in the 30s to the 50s, we were one of the best teams. And then the development stopped, and we were in the wilderness for 40, 50 years until the last decade or so. And the last decade, the improvement's been there, and now we're at the top table in recent years and competing and winning games at the World Championships and not finishing last in our group at the World Championships. So, and we've got players playing in North America at various levels and getting Liam Kirk. Yeah, we're not going to win the World Championships, but we're being competitive and developing, and there's going to be more players from the UK drafted by the NHL. Whether they actually go on and play in the NHL is another thing, but there are going to be more Liam Kirks in the next decade, without a shadow of a doubt. So, and some of our best players have played in Europe, which is the next best thing. And yes, you could argue that the sport in the UK needs a single governing body rather than several governing bodies. And we do need some infrastructure investment desperately. And we need to look at who owns arenas and arena availability, but the sport's grown massively as a participation and as a viewing sport. Attendances have grown, and youth participation and beer and what we call beer league participation, which is basically the ice hockey version of Sunday league participation, has grown. Okay, yeah, okay. So you're new to the game. Look, I mean, unfortunately, I gave all the best YouTuber I suggest you follow is the Hockey Guy, because every season, every off season, he will do a video for new viewers to the sport. Watch the Hockey Guy. It's the best way I can get you to understand the sport more. Is he's a YouTuber? He's called the Hockey Guy. has all my hockey programs. And back in the day, my hockey programs actually had what all the various rules were in the back with all the referee hand signals that are given. When you see the referee on the ice give like a high stick or a holding or a hooking or a slash, that's a slash, that's a high stick, that's a hold or a hooking penalty. That's a trip. That's offside. What all the hand signals mean. It had a breakdown of what all the various refereeing hand signals mean, and that was really good. And I had a few programs with that in. So he has all my old match day programs. He's got a few of my old jerseys. Had a correspondence with him. I'm a member on his channel. And I would say he's the best YouTuber if you want to learn the sport. Watch his content. Honestly, that would be. I've sent so many viewers his way. I've had so many subscribers to this channel. They go, I'm new to the sport of ice hockey. I want to learn more about it. And I always say the hockey guy for me is the best YouTuber I've found who deals in hockey. He's got two channels. He's got the entertainment guy where he discusses other sports and TV and film and wrestling and other stuff. But he has the hockey guy, THG. Best YouTuber out there, in my opinion, when it comes, especially with newer fans, because there's been expansion in the NHL with Vegas and Seattle. And so a lot of new American fans have found the sport. And he's now very popular in Europe as well because the amount of European players, including Liam Kirk, obviously getting drafted back in 2018, who've gone over to North America to play, not just in the NHL, but in the AHL, the ECHL and stuff. But no, that's I suggest you give him a sub and you check him out and you watch his content and leave a comment. Say, look, I'm a new fan. The Sports Boffin sent me over here. Whatever you want to put down. I always recommend that. I've recommended that for about 6 years. Yeah, you have 7 Canadian and the rest are from the US out of 32. 7 Canadian and 20, is it 23 or 25 US teams? You've got the original 6, of which Toronto and Montreal are the Canadian. And then you've got the Rangers, Boston, Detroit, and Chicago. So the New York Rangers, because there's 2 teams in New York, they're your original 6. And then every other team since the original 6, because they're the ones that survived until 1967. So before 1940, there were loads of teams. And then World War II happens and the Great Depression and all that. And the league shrinks. And then in 1967 till now is known as the expansion era. So 1967, 6 teams joined the league. That was LA, St. Louis, Minnesota, bugger. Who else? There was a couple. There were 6 teams, and there's Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and the Golden Seals from California. They joined the league in 1967. Then in 1970, Buffalo and Vancouver join. And then the WHA teams join in 1979, the World Hockey Association. And so from 1979 till 1992, it was a 21-team league because there was 4 WHA teams were absorbed by the NHL in 1979. That's where Wayne Gretzky comes into things. He was playing for the Indianapolis Racers, and then he ends up at the Edmonton Oilers in the 1979 expansion draft. It's a thing. And then we now have a 32-team league. So since the early 90s, so over the last, between 1992 and 2000, like the league explodes, reaches 30 teams by 2000, and then 2017, Vegas joins, in 2021, Seattle joins, and we now have a 32-team league. That's the history of the NHL, really condensed, really quickly, in a nutshell. A Canadian team has not won the Stanley Cup since 1993. That's Montreal, although several Canadian teams have made the Stanley Cup final since 1993 and have come up short every time against an American opponent. Yes, Canada's number one sport is ice hockey. 70 to 75% of Canadians have played ice hockey at least once in their lives at some point. So that's 70% of Canadians have played ice hockey at least once. Whereas ice hockey on the major leagues is fourth overall as participation. It has grown rapidly, but has been overtaken by football. 2 conferences, 4 divisions. 4 divisions of 8, 2 conferences of 16. So as things currently stand, you play teams in your own division 4 times, other teams in your conference 3 times, and then teams in the other conference twice. And then you have your 4 rounds of Stanley Cup playoffs, where you have 3 teams from each division. So that's 12 teams in total. Automatically get the top 3 of each division go into the playoffs, and then you have the wild card spots where you might get 3 from one division and 5 from another in a conference make the playoffs, for example, which has happened in many seasons. Or you get 4 and 4. So the top, so that's, and then you go through to your playoffs where you have a best of 7 series. So yeah, the NHL at the moment is a 2-conference, 4-division system. Although there has been 8 divisions in the past at one point, we're not doing that again. So you have the Metro, the Atlantic, the Central, and the Pacific divisions. You have the Eastern and Western conferences. The best team in the Eastern Conference through the playoffs plays the best team in the Western Conference in the Stanley Cup final. It's the best of 7, so it's first of 4. Progresses to the next round, etc., etc., etc. How many games? The minimum number of games is an 82 regular game season, and then there's a minimum of 16 games you have to win in the playoffs. So you're looking at 82, let's say about 24 to 26 games in the playoffs for a good playoff team that's winning. The maximum you can play is an 82 game season plus, 4 times 7. What's 4 times 7? 40. 28. You're looking at 100 games in a season, maximum. About that, 100 something. The system is different. Well, the system is similar but different. So we have the Elite League, the EIHL, which is the top level. Then you have the NIHL 1, the NIHL 2, and then the Scottish National League below that. So you've got a tiered system where top level, next level, next level, next level, and then you have 2-way contracts or developmental leagues and stuff like that. There is a playing pyramid, but not even close. It's a good quality, but I would suggest you watch an NHL game to see on the TV, to see the actual. It's scary. For me, because I've watched so much of it over many years. So I've watched so many games, and I know a few players, and I've got friends who play, and I've watched the sport for such a long time. The problem is in Europe, but it's a very popular sport in Europe. It's the second most popular sport after association football. But the best European players do end up in the North American NHL systems. They do. The standard has massively improved since I started watching the domestic leagues here. Has massively improved. It's still not on the same level. I would say that the style of play is about 15, 20 years behind the style of play they play in the NHL. It is far more brutal in a sense that there's more fighting. There are still bench clearing brawls. There's full line brawls where, every player on the ice is fighting, including the goalies. So the style of play is like 20 years in the past. Yes, yeah, you could say that. The best players play in North, although there's some pretty world class players that are playing in Europe who have played in North America or haven't gone yet or choose to stay in Europe. Um, there are some really good players playing in Europe right now. The best player, I think, of modern times, Jaromir Jagr, is at the age of 50. Oh God, how Jaromir Jagr is what? He's 54, 53. He's still playing professionally for Kladno. Yeah, Jaromir Jagr started playing professionally the year I was born. Check him out. I've got a Jagr jersey actually signed, so he's still playing. He was playing with the year I was born. He's still playing now. He's in his early 50s. But possibly the greatest player of all time if you count all his stats and all his professional games. Yeah. Rovers taking part in the Rovers taking. Oh yeah, they've been told not to fall in the Thames because of the E. coli. Yes, yes. There's a lot of discussion about the amount of raw sewage being pumped into our rivers by the water companies. That's a thing. Yeah, it's not a good look. Considering that one of the big rubbing centres is at Eton Dorney, and that's only up the road from where I live. Really, it's not, but it is, but it isn't. But my friend's parents live right by Eton Dorney, and I'll be going up to that part of the world in the not so distant future. In a couple of weeks, I've got some time off work, and that's another thing. Average age of retirement. Well, in ice hockey or in sport in general. I think some players have played until their early 40s. With the NHL, ice hockey is an interesting one because when players say they're retiring, some players will retire from the NHL level, which is the best league, at like mid to late 30s, and then they'll go either back to Europe or go over to Europe to play for several years. So you'll see players playing in their early to mid 40s in Europe. In Jaromir Jagr's case, he's playing in his early to mid 50s, who have retired from the NHL level, but they're still playing professionally somewhere or semi-professionally at a decent level, at a lower level, over in Europe or one of the lower leagues in North America, like the SPHL, which is not an affiliate league of the NHL, but it's still a professional league at an older age. And because they still have something to give to the sport on a professional level, and they've been offered a contract, and they've got a decent agent. He said, "Look, we found you a contract. Are you willing to go over to a European league for a couple of years and play?" A former teammate is now coaching over there, wants your experience. And a lot of these North American players or European players who've played in North America will go and finish their careers in Europe because they can still get paid. But the average is about similar to rugby and football. We're talking mid to late 30s. A proportion of players go into their 40s, and Jagr's case 50s, which is really rare. I think only Gordie Howe is the only other player to play into his 50s. I mean, Gordie Howe was playing alongside his sons professionally. His sons were playing as his teammates for the Houston Aeros in the 70s in the WHA, and then the Hartford Whalers in the WHA and in the NHL. The Hartford Whalers are now the Carolina Hurricanes, and there's a lot of discussion about relocation. So Gordie Howe actually played alongside his sons professionally. That happened. That was a thing. Gordie Howe only died a couple of years ago. I think he died in 2017 or 2018, 2019, something like that. He died just before COVID. But he was playing well into his 50s, which is what Jaromir Jagr is doing now. A whole generation of players have been born, drafted, played, and retired from the NHL in Jagr's career. Like, I've been born since he started playing professionally. No, you can't say that happens in many sports. But then you've got a lot of sports where the dad is the coach. So in rugby league right now, you've got Shane Flanagan with Carl Flanagan, the St George Illawarra Dragons in the NRL, and you've got Ivan and Nathan Cleary at the Panthers, father and son coaching, playing tandems. And you've got there's three actually because you've got Kevin Walters and his son at the Brisbane Broncos. One's the coach, one's the player. So there's three father-son player, no coach-player combos in the NRL right now. I'm not sure if that's happened in the AFL before, but it's happened in the NRL. But yeah, Gordie Howe played alongside his sons in both the WHA and the NHL. So there is that, and I can't. That is just ridiculous. It's like ridiculous. It's growing. The PWHL is the new professional women's league in North America, and they have their own YouTube channel where they live stream every game. And actually, it's actually good fun to watch. I've watched a few games, and I've been quite impressed. A couple of my friends have played for the women's national team in this country, and the Bees, the former Bracknell Bees, which is now the Bees Ice Hockey Club, which is basically the Berkshire Bees Ice Hockey Club, but based up in Slough, used to be based in Bracknell. A couple of my friends have played for them, and I would say yes. I would say the quality is decent and is improving, but it's not seen as but it's like rugby union, rugby league for women as well. It's only been in recent years that suddenly there's a lot of more it seems there's more participation and such and so forth. But the PWHL, that's the Women's Ice Hockey North American YouTube channel and the league. And the Hockey Guy is the YouTuber you want to check out when it comes to learning about ice hockey. There are a few others, but I think the Hockey Guy is the yes, it's the PWHL is the PWHL is the women's league in North America. That is just type in PWHL on YouTube and you'll get their YouTube channel and you'll get to see every game live. The Hockey Guy is the best YouTuber I can think of in regards to learning about the sport, especially in the summer when it's the off season. He does a lot of history videos and he does a lot of more career videos of players, and he does more just basic hockey news and things that are happening in regards to the hockey world. And I think once a year he will do a introduction to new viewers of the sport kind of video, and he's quite good. Well, the women's season is only a 16 league at the moment with plans to expand to more teams. The European season pre-season starts in August and the official season start in September, run through until basically now will be the end of the regular season. The playoffs will start in April. Our seasons are done by May. The NHL players go back into training camp in August. The pre-season's in September. The league starts in October, runs through till April. Then the playoffs start, and then the Stanley Cup is awarded before July, end of June. It's basically think of European football. The seasons are pretty similar. start at the end of summer, beginning of autumn, finish at the end of winter, beginning of spring. And then you've got the off season, which is like July, August, and September. So the warm months. That's basically so. The game you watch, the Widnes, for example, will be it's a late season game, and playoffs are looming. But our playoff structure is different than the NHL's playoff structure. Just putting it out there. But most I also apologize about I've got a Chromebook, so I'm getting used to how the caps lock works, where you've got to hold down the search bar button and the alt button to get caps lock on, and then caps lock off. And I'm still getting used to it, and so that explains why half my last post is all capital letters, because fucking Chromebook, and they have different, and there's no caps lock button, there's no num lock, there's no number pad, and there's no caps lock button, which I think is stupid. But I think there's actually a patent by Microsoft, so there's that. Which structure do I prefer? The thing is, do I really have a structure I prefer? I think, to me, the North American leagues play more games than the European leagues. The European leagues, you'll have 2, potentially 3 games a week for a team. You can play up to 4 games in 6 days. You can have a 5-game week. You can have, a back-to-back-to-back situation where you're playing 3 games in 3 days. And then a day off, then another game, then a day off, then another game. You can play 5 games in a week. So structure, I think. I mean, the average length of season in the European leagues is around 50 to 56 games. But then again, we have the cup competitions as well. So actually, it sort of makes sense that we're about a similar length season, 50 to 60 odd games, something like that. Whereas the NHL is an 82-game season plus playoffs. We have a 50 to 60 game season plus playoffs, and our playoff structures are slightly different to North America, and so the structures are slightly different, but the basic length of season is roughly the same. End of August, September, depending on in Europe, August, September start. NHL and the affiliate leagues is end of September, beginning of October start. Run through. There's a break over Christmas. There's actually a mid-season break in Europe, but no, you can play 4, 5 games in 7 days. That's not unheard of. Back to back, day off, game, day off, back to back. You can play 5 games in a week with 2 rest days. Yes, you can have a 5-game week, and I'm not joking. That has been done. You've got to remember, you've got to fit 82 games into a season with a Christmas week off, so a winter break, and then a week in February for the All-Star break or the Olympics, so a 2-week break. You've got an 82-game season to fit in between October and April. 82 games in 5 months. So, yeah, I have seen a 5-game week where you have Monday, Tuesday back-to-back, Wednesday off, Thursday play a game, Friday off, Saturday, Sunday back-to-back. So you can have 5 games in 7 days. That has happened. It is a lot. It is a lot. You may have an extended road trip where you play, out of those 5 games, you might have 4 games on the road. No, you might have all 5 on the road. I think the longest road trip that a team's had like 13 games, and that was because they were waiting for their arena to get built. And I think it was the Islanders. I think the Islanders had an extended road trip to start a season. I think also the Arizona Coyotes, I think this season or last season, had like a lengthy road trip while their arena was being upgraded. So you could have, because you've got teams on the Pacific coast from Vancouver all the way down to LA. You've got teams on the East Coast from, Ottawa, Montreal, all the way down to Miami, Florida, plus every team in between. You've got to play a certain amount of games against the other conference, and you've got to play a certain amount of games against the other division in your conference, being 3 each. You're going to have some lengthy road trips. So half your season has to be played at home. That's 41 games. And you've got to play 41 games on the road. You're going to have some lengthy road trips. And the average for a road trip is generally 5-6 games where you're on the road. That's an average length for the long road trip. So let's say you're playing all the other Pacific, because you've got 8 teams per division. So let's say you're playing a road trip against, let's say you're a Central Division team. I'm a Jets fan from Winnipeg. So let's say that. So you're Central Division team, Winnipeg Jets, and you're playing a Pacific Division road trip. So you're going to play, you'll be playing Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver. They're the 3 Canadian teams in the Pacific. You've got Seattle. So that's 4 teams. And then you've got San Jose, Anaheim, LA, and Vegas. That's your 8 teams. You might have to play 6 of those teams on a lengthy road trip. So you might do the three Canadian teams, Seattle, and then potentially San Jose as part of your road trip. And then you might go back into playing Colorado or Arizona. Colorado and Arizona in the Central Division. You go play your division rivals. Then you go homestand where you play, let's say, Colorado and Arizona again. And then you finish off with another little road trip in Southern California. That's sort of how the road trips work. And that's within your own conference. And then you've got to, play the other conference twice. The Jets have had 2 teams. So when I was a kid, the original Winnipeg Jets, former WHA team, drafted a player called Timo Solani from Finland. And he was a very good, he's the record rookie goal scorer. He scored over 70 goals in his rookie season. And he's got over 100 points as a rookie, so that doesn't happen often. And one of my favourite players, Shane Doan, was drafted by the team in the first round. In the last season, the team was in Winnipeg before they went to Arizona. And then the team went to Arizona, and the reason why was they couldn't afford to keep Timo Solani. The Canadian dollar was in the tank. The Canadian economy was in the tank after the Cold War, and they couldn't keep all their players. There was no salary cap at the time. Solani ends up leaving. I think he ended up at Anaheim, and Shane Doan stuck with the team. And when they went to what was Phoenix, which is now Arizona, the Coyotes, and then a few years after that, in 1999, Atlanta joins the league as an expansion team. Suck, really shit. 1 playoff appearance in many years, and then they didn't have an arena and really bad ownership. And then Winnipeg were like, we have an AHL team in the Manitoba Moose. Oh, by the way, we have an NHL ready arena, and we have the wealthiest man in Canada as one of the co-owners. We'll have the team, and the team was relocated from Atlanta to Winnipeg in 2011, and but the balance was restored. But the Winnipeg Jets were the most successful WHA team when the WHA existed in the 70s. So there is that. Itchy eye. There's some great players. The most successful team is the Montreal Canadiens when it comes to Stanley Cup wins. Maple Leafs fans say every year is going to be their year. They haven't won a second round since 1967 when they last won the Cup, and they've never actually had to play more than 3 rounds to win a Stanley Cup because it was easier to win the Stanley Cup pre-1967. Look, I mean, when you go to 2 games in the Elite League or the National League, you'll see every NHL jersey conceivable being worn by fans, home and away. There will be a lot of fans turning up who will have NHL and AHL jerseys on, and even other European jerseys as well. You're going to come across some very obscure teams that you've never heard of before, and some very obscure locations, probably in Canada, you've never heard of before. Some of these are junior league teams and minor league teams and teams from Europe that you would have never heard of before. And the hockey fan base is basically a very, very big extended family, because the amount of professional players ever is, when it comes to professional sport, is actually very, very low, because only a handful of countries actually have fully professional league systems, the UK being one of them. And so there's not a lot of, well, there is player movement, there is a fair bit, but there's not a lot of player movement, if that makes sense. So it's a very small world. Let's just say that. Very small world. But no, I'm glad that you decided to go to a hockey game and experience for the first time what it's like to yeah, they still do. 2K and EA Sports are the ones who produced the ice hockey games over the years. They're not as good as they once were. I think EA Sports, and the fact all these sports games on the console, I think there's only so far you can go before you have to go full VR to improve the gaming experience. There's only so far you can go with the game mechanics. But the NHL series is still on EA Sports. The 2K games franchise, do they still do the ice hockey? They did for a while, but I think the NHL and some of the other leagues have signed agreements with EA Sports, but much like FIFA did with EA Games with the FIFA franchise, which is now EAFC, but that's another debate. They make a lot of money out of that. The players actually make a lot of money out of that. They get a share in the profits. And there's a big thing, and one thing you will learn and you will hear of and hear discussed with hardcore hockey fans, including myself, is the NHL strike and the 3 lockouts that we've had since 1994. You'll also hear about the lost season of 04-05. So nearly 20 years ago, we lost a whole season to a lockout. Very similar to what was happening in Major League Baseball a year or so ago when they had a delayed start to their season. There was a breakdown in the relationship between the NHLPA, which is the players' union, and the league, which is the owners and so forth. Because it's a franchise model. Remember that. It's not a promotion relegation, it's a franchise model. So you as an owner, you buy in, you buy a franchise, you buy in, you buy a stake in the league by having a team. And we've had 3 lockouts. So we've had 2 shortened seasons, well, technically 3 if you count the COVID seasons, or 4 if you count the 2 COVID disrupted seasons. And we've had 3 lockouts, one including a whole season wiped out, and the other 2 had half seasons wiped out. So technically, we've lost about 2.5 seasons, 3 seasons worth of hockey since I've been watching, for 2 reasons: lockouts and strikes and COVID. Do I follow? Yeah, I do. I follow what was the Bracknell Bees, which is now just the Bees Ice Hockey Club, which play in Slough, which is just up the, well, not just up the road, but it's still nearby. And I haven't been to a game for a few years because living situation and money and transport, but I've got friends who still go regularly to games and keep me updated. And my friend's dad sponsors the team, so my mate Jamie, who occasionally you'll see in the live stream chat, his dad is one of the team sponsors of the Bees. So there we go. I've got quite a few of their jerseys. I haven't, but as I say, I haven't been to a game for 4 years. But I've moved. So I when I was in my last apartment 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, after I moved, I watched a couple of early season games and a few preseason games. Then I moved to my old apartment, my old flat. And then I'm not going to go into it, but I had to move again. And only a few days later, we went into the COVID lockdown, and the season was suspended, and that was that. And I was actually going to go to the last game played in the old rink before it was knocked down, but that's another thing I didn't actually go in the end. But so basically, yeah, I haven't been since I lived just outside of Maidenhead. I used to live in a place called Taplow, which is in between Maidenhead and Slough, and also near Windsor, just on the River Thames. Lived there for a while, and since I moved there, I haven't been to a game for, well, COVID had a big impact on it, obviously, but also I moved further away, and then I moved where I am now. Yeah, I can keep up. I keep up to date online. I have them on Facebook. I used to follow them on Twitter. Yeah, you can keep up to date with what you're going to find. Obviously, discussing the NRL, for example, we see a lot of players get put on report for high contact and dangerous contact, like hip drop tackles, and then they're put on report, the citing commission, that kind of thing, the disciplinary committee. Then they will face the judiciary, where they are told you're getting X amount of games suspended and a fine for dangerous contact or foul play. You will see a lot of that. And then you'll see a lot of fans blowing up, going, well, there's inconsistency here because this player did the same thing, got X amount of games. This player's getting a lesser or stronger punishment. Then you go, oh, this player's got a history of it, all this. Yeah, I think the sports relationship with social media is very, very interesting. There are some pros. So when you miss a game and you have updates on the internet, and the accessibility also of the internet, when if you miss a game, there's a match report up within half an hour. There may be video highlights on YouTube or on league pages or websites, and so you can watch a bit of, if not the whole game. Some leagues and some teams will live stream every single game on YouTube. So the PWHL, for example, really smart thinking, realizing can't get the best TV deal, but we've got a thing called YouTube. We can live stream every game, which will supplement our income, where it's very difficult with women's sports sometimes to get that TV deal and get that audience. Their viewership figures have been fantastic on YouTube, by the way. They've had really strong viewership figures and really big attendance figures as well. That we're talking over 10,000, 15,000 going to games, which, when you think about it, actually is not far off NHL attendance in some arenas. So really strong attendance at the games and a good viewership numbers on YouTube. So there is that. That's a positive of social media and sport. But then you see the negative, and you sometimes have to look at my comment sections. You will get the keyboard warrior fan who is the armchair coach, who may not have played the sport since they were a kid, and we're talking a lot of the time is middle-aged men. That's what I find really funny is men over the age of 35. Oh no, it's like I haven't even discussed the England kit controversy with Nike. Firstly, the price of the kit is disgusting. I haven't even touched on the Major League Baseball controversy again with Nike in regards to the kit manufacturer and the quality of the product that has been given to fans to buy, and it's shit. So Nike as a jersey and a kit manufacturer is facing a lot of backlash for design decisions they have taken in regards to fan apparel and match day apparel for the players. But social media has gone into meltdown about that, and we are seeing a lot of toxic criticism rather than constructive criticism. A lot of overgrown man-child. Yes, I call it man-child syndrome. I think. Oh yeah, when you get called various things because you openly, disagree with them on a very. Look, I try and look at it. I could have done a video on the England jersey controversy and my personal views, and I probably will tomorrow because I've got an early start tomorrow and an early finish tomorrow, and then Saturday, Sunday I'm off, and I'm back in work Monday, and then in the rest of next week, and then the week after I'm on holiday for the entire week. I've got a whole week off. I'm going to spend one day treating myself to a day out. I'm going down the south coast. I'm going to the New Forest actually for the day, and I'm just going to take myself out and just, you know, enjoy a day out in the New Forest. Go and explore. I might go to a few historical sites down the New Forest and just have a nerd day out. Might put some content up for both channels, both this channel and the other channel, the History Boffin. And mate, I might even review a few things. Yes, I might even do a few holiday reviews actually. Just having a day out, but I've got a whole week off in 2 weeks' time, and I will probably do some more football club history videos of some European clubs and some European leagues. I think I'm going to do some videos on, I think, some Italian clubs, Spanish clubs, and Swiss clubs. They're going to be interesting, and potentially some Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish clubs, just to mix it up, because I've done most of the UK. Not many UK clubs left in Scotland, Wales, and England, and Northern. Well, I've got to do all of Northern Ireland. That would be fun, and the Republic. But I'm going to look at some of the European clubs and their histories. They seem to do very well when I do them. So there's that. Well, in regards to what I found, female athletes seem to get it a lot worse than male athletes in regards to a lot of the abuse they get. And I can't comment on a lot of the stuff that gets thrown their way, but we hear what happens to them online and some of the abuse they get, which is abhorrent. And then when like Mason Greenwood was, in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, and a few other players were doing, athletes were doing some really silly things. There's that. I mean, there can be constructive criticism, and then there's just the actual outright hate. Now, I'm not an Owen Farrell fan, but his tackle technique is poor, his discipline record is poor, and he seems to get things wrong on the field, get sent off, suspended a lot. Now, I don't think he had the worst World Cup. I don't think he had the best World Cup, but he's decided to potentially end his international rugby union career. Now, I've been critical of Owen Farrell for some of the game management, some of the antics on and off the field and all that, and his playing style. I don't think it suits how England want to play, but hey, he won a lot of games as an England fly half and an inside centre. He's won a lot of games as England captain. But some of his performances, you had to criticise them. And you had to do it fairly, going, he wasn't great, or his leadership let the side down, or he had a poor game. And that is a representative of the team. But then there were others online, and I can't comment on what he faces on Twitter and what he faces on, any other social media. He could be on Instagram, I don't know. And I can't comment if he's been sent abusive messages on the personal messenger side of things, direct messenger. But he copped a lot. I know Danny Cipriani copped a lot as well, but then Danny Cipriani didn't help himself with a lot of his off-field antics and was rightly criticised for basically being a tool, being an absolute idiot. And he didn't deal with it very well. But then there was, again, the personal attacks. When you can say, well, he clearly got a problem. He's clearly got it. And it's a difficult one. There is a fine line being critical of a player's on-field performance, and if they misbehave off the field, they have to strike a balance, which is fair. But then there is that role model aspect of their role models for young kids, community role models, that kind of thing. But it's when they bite back. The best thing a lot of athletes and teams can do is go, get rid of social media. Just get rid of it. And then you've lost that distraction. Then you don't know you're getting this abuse. But one thing, what I found when we had the Olympics in 2012, this is when I first started thinking seriously about doing YouTube and social media the first time around. I actually got my first Twitter account. Or was it my first account? I decided, I'm going to try give this Twitter a go. And I found then it was really interesting how the athletes were more accessible, and you could, go praise them and go, it's fantastic. Oh, this is, and there was a lot of positives back then. And for some reason, over the last 12 years, we've gone from, or decade and a half, 10, 15 years, we've gone from a good positive relationship where the sport is more accessible for the fan, and especially the younger fan. Getting to communicate with their idols, the athletes that they are fans of, or the teams they are fans of, to a very I say this: social media, especially what was Twitter, which is now X, is the sewer of humanity, and I can see Facebook's going the same way. I tried Threads for a little bit. Turns out it's a left-wing echo chamber. Twitter is a right-wing echo chamber. Facebook is just a free-for-all. And so I'm thinking about getting rid of my personal Facebook. I'm thinking about potentially having a channel Facebook to do with the channel, but potentially. I've stopped sharing my videos on Facebook now. And I've also noticed since Elon Musk bought out Twitter, rebranded it as X, when I go on my analytics and I look at where my viewers are actually sharing the content, people aren't sharing on Twitter or what is now X. They're not sharing anymore. My followers, my viewers, you guys, seem to have abandoned Twitter. You don't tweet anymore or whatever X do. And so when it comes to you guys sharing the content so your friends can, and relatives can watch what I'm doing, so it helps grow the community, you're not sharing on Twitter anymore, and Facebook sharing has dropped off the cliff. Yeah, if I was a top level sportsman, I would bin off socials. I know a lot of them have, but it's a difficult one because there's a lot of these athletes and sports stars are quite marketable, and with the advertising revenue, admittedly, it's fluctuated with what's going on with social media, but the advertising revenue and the potential for marketing purposes, when a company comes along and goes, we see that you like Nike or Adidas or Puma, one of the big sports brands, Lotto, Diodora, whatever it may be. We see that you like wearing our boots, or you're a goalkeeper and you wear our goalkeeping gloves, or we see that when you're not playing and you're out in town, I'm wearing Adidas tracky bottoms and a Nike top for some reason because I just what I call slob wear. But I have a lot of Nike gear. I have a lot of Adidas gear. I've got Puma, for example. Obviously, today I'm drinking Lucozade, but normally I'm having a Monster. And let's say I'm seen regularly using this product. Then the company that makes their products, like Lucozade or Monster, comes along and is like, we'll be your personal sponsor. We want you to appear in adverts for us. You like wearing our boots. We're Nike, for example. We want you to be part of an advertising campaign. And things like that happen. And that's where the third-party sponsorship arrangements come in. And it's the same with, certain actors and TV stars and things like that, journalists. They might get seen. Their favorite car might be Jaguar. So Jaguar Land Rover come along and go, do you want to appear in a Jaguar Land Rover advert? Because we know that you are a customer. Kind of cool if you were to do an advertising campaign, and we'll be a personal sponsor, and you get some money for appearing in the advert. That's how third-party payments work. So you see on the Gillette adverts that you'll see England football and cricket players get signed up. In Australia, it's NIB, which I think is a medical insurance company. There's a lot of NRL and AFL players signed up for NIB because the teams they play for are sponsored by NIB, and they've been chosen as the faces of those advertising campaigns because these players are quite marketable. Yes, Instagram is quite popular. It is. Do you think certain platforms such as Facebook will cease to exist at some point, be replaced? No. I mean, there were some very great, well-known companies have ceased to exist altogether or been bought out or merged that existed when I was a kid. I mean, some of them you wouldn't have heard of, but I know what they are. I mean, what is it? Rover MG, for example, car company. MG has been resurrected, but Rover doesn't exist anymore. It's patented as in the trademark and the logo is owned by people who own MG, but you won't see any new Rover cars being built. TVR, another car company, doesn't exist anymore. Um, Austin's another one. They were a car company for a while. Um, you know, um, well, MySpace, no, it doesn't exist. I mean, it's been archived. It's been archived, so people's MySpace profiles are archived. Bebo doesn't exist anymore. I think no, I think Bebo does still exist. Bebo and MySpace were what Facebook should have been at the time. Um, and Facebook nicked some pretty good ideas off them, and for some reason, Facebook won that particular battle at the time to be the social media network. And I think we're seeing a sort of a duopoly to a certain extent. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, and you've got Twitter, for example, or X, and then you've got Snapchat and a few of the other ones. But basically, MySpace and Bieber, I think if they continued to exist, I think it would have possibly been potentially better. But they seem to be much better platforms in regards to not having the same level of toxicity that we are currently seeing and what survived and what has come since, if that makes sense. No, I only started hearing of Facebook in about 2007 to 2008. I got my first. I've had two Facebook accounts. I got my first one in 2009. So I was 2 years behind my friends. I didn't get Twitter until 2012, and then I didn't get YouTube and actually get set up a YouTube account until 2014. So I was a bit later to the social media side of things, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying it is, but I don't know. I just didn't really. I mean, crikey, I didn't get my first smartphone until 2017. So, and some of my friends had got the first ever iPhone in 2007. So I was like a full 10 years behind some of my friends, but I didn't have the disposable income to afford an iPhone handset because they were ridiculously expensive and always have been. But no, I didn't. I mean, my current phone is nearly 3.5 years old. This is falling up. I mean, look at it; it's falling apart, and it is not in the best of shape. So I do need to get a new. I need to get an upgrade at some point. Get a new phone. So a trip down the phone network is in order. Oh no, well, YouTube. I remember the badger, 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 badger. The Hobbits are going to Isengard video, and I also remember the He-Man. When I wake up in the da, 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 da. I remember the first two videos on YouTube. Long time ago. I also remember the old College Humor website, social media video website from a few years back. That doesn't exist it doesn't exist anymore. But badger, 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 mushroom, mushroom, badger. Yes, everyone remembers the badger, 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 mushroom, mushroom, mushroom. There is some pretty disturbing stuff on YouTube that's still up there. It does look ancient, but that was a couple of I think it was College Humor. I think they're still going, but I think they got bought out. But that was a couple of cartoonists and are mucking around making soundboards and cartoon reels, and YouTube was a great platform for them to get their artwork and their content out there to get recognized. But no, I look, YouTube has beaten off every other video sharing site there is, and then it got bought by Google, and having a big tech firm behind you helps. Yeah, a little bit. we have gone full circle. I wish I had started creating YouTube content a few years earlier. I think the trajectory of the channel would have been slightly different. But it is what it is. We are where we are. It's still a hobby. Yes, I mean, admittedly, if I didn't have this chesty cough and infection thing, I would have probably made a lot more content the last couple of weeks. But as I say, I've got a week off coming up, and then I can start dissecting. I've also lost a little bit of motivation the last couple of weeks, and I think being ill has contributed to that. But no, I think as I said when started the stream with what's going on with the AFL with the drug scandal and the cover up allegedly taking place, and with what's going on with the NRL with a few items, especially with the Leichhardt Oval and government funding for building stadiums, and should private investment be involved in it and things like that? Should the taxpayer be liable for a stadium redevelopment? That's a big talking point. There's the NHL is in the tail end of their season before playoffs and the run into the end of the season, and there's multiple teams looking like they're going to hit 100 points again this season, which is going to be good. I've just lost a little bit of motivation the last couple of weeks. I always seem to find around the end of winter, beginning of spring, this time of year, just a little bit. I wouldn't say fatigue, but I seem to just get a little bit I think fatigue is possibly the right word. I do find myself just feeling a little bit going through the motions a little bit, because obviously the football season drags on at this point. The rugby union season drags on at this point. Jaded is quite a good word. But I haven't been. I mean, this winter I've had 3 chest infections. Been ill 3 times. And I haven't really got over the first one. So basically, it's just I've had this underlying chesty cough, and I've had 3 bouts of basically flu. Probably COVID, but probably flu as well, or scarlet fever. I know there's a bout of scarlet fever going around my workplace, and people just can't take time off. We just are not earning the income. Our wages are so crap that we're just not earning the money. But that a lot of the lads just can't afford time off to take time out. But yeah, there's been flu going around, scarlet fever going around. I know one of my work colleagues, his son's had scarlet fever, and I think he's built up a natural immunity or whatever, or he's not, one of those susceptible to getting it. But I've somehow managed to end up getting it. Another work colleague's had it, and there's a few others with coughs and colds. And I know scarlet fever has been 2 or 3 years of really bad outbreaks of it as kids have gone back to school and mingling since the COVID lockdowns. I know I've had it at least twice in the last 3 years. Scarlet fever, it's horrible. And what I found is that when I first moved into this current apartment, I didn't get ill for about 2 years, and it's only been in the last year and a half that I've started getting chest infections again and picking up these viruses. Now, the job that I do as my day job, potentially the way we do our job in this borough is different to my previous employers, where we don't have wheelie bins for everything yet. We're still having a lot of recycling sacks and boxes and rubbish bags, whereas my last 2 employers, everything was in wheelie bins, apart from a couple of streets that had special dispensations. So potentially, maybe that's another thing that's happening. I don't know. But it's just being a bit more ill. But I don't think the weather since last summer's helped. We've had a lot of rain. It's been very damp and above average temperatures, so it's been damp and horrible and grotty, and I think that's had an impact on me. Whereas 2020, 2021, 2022 was a lot hotter but drier, so it wasn't raining all the time. No, I don't have a driving license, full license. I'm not. Me drive the bin lorry? Are you mad? I can't even get out of bed without falling over. No, I mean, it's it to me. I don't think I would do it anyway, or be comfortable doing it. I didn't mind being on a 125 moped scooter, but I found that a little bit intimidating when I first started doing that. And people go, "Oh, it's a smaller vehicle, it's easy." It's not as easy as it looks. But I got kind of used to being exposed on. I find it weird now being actually a passenger in a car. Um, I find it weird now being a passenger in a car because for so many years I was operating a vehicle, in my case, a 125 moped scooter, and you're exposed and you're in control, but you're also very, very exposed and vulnerable to falling off and getting run over and crashed into and all that. And because I was in control of the vehicle, now I'm a very awkward passenger. I don't enjoy being a passenger in a car anymore. Really hate it. Really hate it. And but I'm fine on the train. It's weird that I can get the train anywhere and be like perfectly happy and content. But being a passenger in a car, absolutely hate it. So when I was going down to my nan's funeral last year with my sister, she obviously drove. It was weird because her car is very high up. I think she's got a T-Rock, or is it a T-Cross? I can't remember. She's got one of those Volkswagen T-Rock, T-Cross kind of cars. But the seating position, you're actually quite high up because it's quite a tall car. And that is really interesting. So I felt more comfortable in her car than a lot of other cars as a passenger because you're a bit lower down. I don't like low slung sports cars. It's horrible. It's weird. Well, no, but I've always enjoyed getting the train. I don't know. It's weird. I know we've gone off sports topic a little bit, but I've always enjoyed getting the train. I've never had a bad experience on the train, really, even with all delays and cancellations and diversions. But then again, I'm a bit of a railway nut. And if I was to go through all my books on railway history, no, let's not go into the train spotting side of things. Just showing my ADHD there and big on the spectrum. A bit of ADHD. No, but I've always enjoyed. I've always enjoyed, and I've always been comfortable. I actually like getting the train for all the problems with our railway network and our transportation network, which again I can loop back into sport because certain aspects of certain grounds transportation links, and this is where having the fifth round of the FA Cup on a weeknight, empty seats, and being very noticeable, transportation links, transportation network, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I've always enjoyed taking the train. I actually find it kind of relaxing. I know a lot of people get stressed when they're commuting and getting the train places. And when I was commuting for work on the train, then yes, I got a bit stressed. But when I'm, booking some time off, like I'm, week or so's time, I'm going to have a week off work. I'm going to be going down the New Forest for the day. And of course, to get there, I've got to get 4 trains. I've got to go from where I live to one train station, change, get another train, next change over, get another train, then change again, and then get to where I've got to go. It's going to take me nearly 3 hours of train travel, but I'm okay with that because that gives me about 5, 6, 8 hours to do what I want to do in Lymington, which is in between Southampton and Bournemouth. And it's just south of the New Forest, or a little bit of the outside of Lymington to the southwest is actually technically part of the New Forest National Park. And it's just up the road from Hurst Castle, which is a channel fort kind of thing. It's a big military fortification that was never actually like a Lord of the Manor kind of castle. It was built by Henry VIII a long time ago when there was the risk of conflict with France. It protects the western entrance to the Solent, opposite the Isle of Wight, opposite Yarmouth, and it was a Channel fort, and then it fell into disuse after the English Civil War. It was reactivated a few times, strengthened, all that, and then during the Victorian era, before the Franco-Prussian War, but after the Crimean War, there was a threat of potential conflict with France again under Napoleon III, and I can't remember if it was the Disraeli government or one of the Gladstone governments, and Palmerston. Yes, I'm now showing the history buff side of things. They reactivated, refortified it, modernized it, and so there's fortifications from that period. And then during the First and Second World Wars, they had some emplacements there and command centres and bits and pieces. So it's 500 years of military history, but it's a 10-mile walk from Lymington to Hurst Castle and back, and I don't have that much time in the day, so but yeah, I'll be going down there. We briefly did, yes. I gave you guys a bit of a history lesson. It's fantastic, I tell you. But yeah, no, I'll be going down the New Forest for the day. I'll be getting an early train in the morning, and getting a train back in mid-afternoon, early evening, and then get home, and then I'll do some content for both channels. I might do some videos whilst I'm out there, but I've got to be mindful of my data plan, so I might not be able to do as much content whilst I'm out there. I might record some stuff and then post the videos when I get home. But yeah, I just need a little bit of a break from work and doing this and get out and about. It's been a while since I've done a bit of exploring like that, and getting out and about. Obviously, COVID has impacted that. No longer having my own vehicles impacted that. Actually having a couple of serious motorcycle accidents has impacted that over the last few years. So I haven't done as much exploring, but I might, and then another day might go up to Henley on Thames and just walk along the riverfront and have a bit of a day out up in Henley, which I've done a few times in the past, and that's quite a nice experience as well. That's quite pleasant. But yeah, I've got to get eight. Technically, I've got to get 8 trains in total when I go down the New Forest. 4 there and 4 back. Fantastic. But no, I like going places like that, and I've had a few video ideas and playlist ideas where go to a sporting event at a stadium, and then I look at the sporting side of things, and then other things to do around a stadium. If you're going up for a long weekend, like you're watching an FA Cup game, but you want to spend a bit of time, let's say, exploring, using that as a hub and exploring the local area for tourism purposes, that I could do a video idea like that at some point if the channel became self-sufficient and big enough. No, it's hilarious because you just look out the window at the countryside. It's fantastic. Yeah, there's a few YouTubers who go around either rugby stadiums or football stadiums, or there's another guy, a Canadian guy, who's going around ice hockey leagues and arenas all around the world. He's doing it on Instagram. I believe he's doing it on YouTube as well, and he's going to bits and pieces. There's a few Americans who are, who've done some bits and pieces in regards to the NRL games in Vegas and planning to go every year now. There's a few, but again, I want to be unique. I don't want to copy them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I want to be a bit. This is why I like how I do it on this channel, where I keep the things so basic, no bells and whistles, no, what's the term? No, crazy edited thumbnails and all that. I wouldn't say it's getting more difficult. I'd say, there's a lot of. I don't think there's a multi-sports channels like this, but there's channels that have a similar format to this, like the hockey guy. He was very, very similar starting out how he did it. He's tweaked it a little bit. He's a bit different. He's got more structure to his channel than I do. He has a regular upload schedule. He does it every day. Sometimes he does 8-10 videos a day. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. It depends on how busy the NHL schedule is that night, or if it's the off season and he's doing content. But I would say that the fact that I cover so many sports and leagues and sports stories, I think that I'm starting to narrow down the sports that I'm covering a little bit more now. In saying that, I think the current AFL scandal deserves a video and a proper in look. I don't know how I'm gonna type maybe AFL embroiled in drug cover-up scandal. My thoughts, because again, these are allegations, and nothing's been proven yet. Although there's enough evidence out there to suggest this is going on, it has been going on, and this is not a new thing. This is been going on quite some time, and this is quite a well-known thing within the sport. This is an issue that's been going on for some time. I wouldn't say it's just the amount of time you've got to commit. If it's the amount of time you've got to commit every day, and there's a lot of sports that I'm not a massive fan of, or I don't enjoy watching. Now, I've always said this: just because I don't enjoy that particular sport does not mean that particular sport does not have merit, and that those who are fans of it, are stupid or wrong. Because I can see the pros of those sports, and there are always cons in every sport, but I can see why people would be attracted to basketball and baseball and why there are fans of those sports. That doesn't mean I don't need content on the NBA and Major League Baseball and some of the issues those leagues are facing. And I've done a lot of content recently on Major League Baseball. There's been a lot of discussion points in regards to Major League Baseball. I do less content on the NFL now than what I did before. And I don't. It's a difficult one because my rugby union videos do really well, but I'm enjoying the sport less. That makes sense. Well, look, I mean, North American sports. I mean, it's an interesting one because you've got the MLS, you've got the NHL, you've got the NFL, you've got the NBA, you've got Major League Baseball, you've got Major League Rugby as well now. So there's the big four and the two lesser major leagues, basically. And now the NRL has taken games to Vegas. And we've had the NRL Combine. There's been several players have been offered to go over to Australia to try and crack an NRL or NRLW roster. So there was women playing as well. And there have been some players offered the opportunity to try and get a contract. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Very interesting stuff going on. And I always say that I've had a lot of American viewers find North American viewers find my channel and get into the European leagues and Australian leagues and sports through finding the channel. And vice versa. I mean, you're from Wales, you're from the UK, you've just got into ice hockey. Obviously, you want to learn more about the NHL, the AHL and ECHL, which are the two lesser minor league affiliates. So NHL, AHL, ECHL in that order. And what will happen is you have the draft in the off season. So there'll be the NHL draft. I think the AHL still has a draft as well. So you have the junior leagues in North America, and you have the European leagues over here, and the NHL and AHL will draft, and we'll have multiple rounds of draft. I think there's 7 rounds at the moment and 32 picks per round. And players get drafted. Out of the draft, maybe 5 to 10 players may play the following season, from the first overall pick to the 10th overall pick, for example. All the other players will get put into the development systems, or they may stay in juniors, or they may stay in the European leagues, and they may never make the NHL. So, do I have many Welsh viewers? I don't know how many viewers are actually from Wales unless I actually look at the United Kingdom data, and there's enough Welsh viewers to hit that minimum threshold to actually be picked up and say, look, oh, here's your percentage of viewers from Wales out of the UK, which is interesting. Wales doesn't rank very highly on viewership at all. It's just how it is. Scotland seems to do a lot better regularly than Wales. Just how it is. That's across all sports, every month, every day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Wales doesn't rank very highly. And I find that interesting because when I've watched FA Cup games where Newport or Wrexham or Cardiff or Swansea are playing, the view counts are really good. The club history videos of those 4 clubs did really, really well when I did those videos in the last couple of years. And when I do match reviews of when they have been playing, the view counts are really good. Again, the rugby union reviews when it comes to internationals, other than that, not a lot of interest. Yeah, but you're from North Wales, and that is what's really interesting. You live in Anglesey, and there is a regional divide in Wales, much like in England when it comes to rugby league, rugby union, the north-south divide. In Wales, it's rugby union, football divide, basically. And even in the big urban areas like Wrexham, Cardiff, Swansea, Newport, ironically, the more popular sport is actually football. They get better crowd attendances, bigger fan bases. But North and West Wales, I don't know what it is. It's not the biggest population centres. It's very rural. It's not great transport infrastructure. We can talk about again the train and driving cars and riding motorcycles and that, but you look at the population centres and the sparsely populated areas of most of Wales, and the lack of transport infrastructure and the lack of corporate investment and corporate money is a thing. So it has an impact. And then you look at what is basically near Anglesey on the north coast of Wales, basically on western Merseyside. Suddenly you have Flintshire and the towns along that northern stretch of Wales, and suddenly the population increases again, and they all play football. No rugby players come from that area. They all play football. They end up in the youth systems or the local clubs, football, non-league, and some of them end up playing for clubs like Tranmere and Chester and Crewe and Liverpool, and you end up with your Michael Owens, who are from that part of the world. And you end up with your Ian Rushes, for example, who end up playing over there. And that's what it is. Rugby union tried to get into North Wales with the Celtic Crusaders 20 years ago, and it failed. Rugby leagues tried, failed. Football seems to just be clinging on, but what you basically have is a very rural population, low population density, and really poor transport infrastructure. And that impacts a lot of things. And then you have that lack of a corporate footprint with money and then low disposable income. There you go. But the fact you're more of a football fan, originally from Cardiff, now living in North Wales, says a lot. It does say a lot. It also says of the disconnect that Welsh Rugby Union seems to have with the Welsh population, and the way they've structured the four regions and the Welsh domestic premiership, and where the clubs are based and how much money they don't make and don't make, and the money side of it, the issues structurally, the amount of Welsh Rugby League and Rugby Union players who are currently banned for abusing performance-enhancing substances and or recreationals make up about half of all the athletes in the UK on the banned list right now. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, there is a growing disconnect between the Welsh Valleys and parts of South Wales where rugby union is really popular, and the rest, and the rest of Wales. Much like the disconnect between the RFL believing there's no rugby league fans outside the M62 corridor when we exist, hello, and their growth strategy outside the traditional areas of rugby league fandom, and the fact that the NRL may come in and save the RFL and Super League from itself because the game is struggling. The sport is in trouble, and has been for some time. Yeah, so there's that. But no, it was some interesting questions, some interesting discussion that we've had. But no, it's I see people online slate Wales for using population as an excuse for football results being poor. Do you think it's a valid reason? Actually, I will say this. I mean, look, they got to a playoff, so they narrowly missed out on qualification for a tournament. In fact, their recent record for qualification has been pretty good, if we're being honest. 1 World Cup and 3 Euros or something. They've actually had a pretty decent qualification record for the last 5 tournaments. For their population size, with only 4 fully professional clubs in the English league structure at the moment, that's not bad going. When you've only got 4 fully professional clubs playing in one of the top league structures in the world, that's not bad going. I wouldn't say that's a poor excuse. I would say, yes, with only a few sizable urban areas and with most kids wanting to play rugby union traditionally for the if they want to go into the national system, but with only 4 professional clubs, with youth systems and etc., in the various levels of the Football League pyramid, that's not bad going. Merthyr Tydfil doesn't count because it's non-league. Not going to lie, it's not fully professional. It's non-league. It's not even close to Wrexham and Newport in the level of the pyramid. But in saying that, it wasn't that long ago, less than a decade ago, only 2 professional clubs fully professional, which was Swansea and Cardiff. Wrexham kept their professional status, but it was touch and go whether they would exist or not, and Newport County as well. Merthyr Tydfil, potentially, if they can sign a couple of good non-league players, get on that run, get a couple of promotions, get there, its potential is there. If Forest Green Rovers can make the Football League, Merthyr Tydfil can definitely make the Football League. Let's not kid ourselves. Come on, if Forest Green Rovers can do it, anyone can do it. But it might take the right ownership to come in. But you got to look at the level they've been playing at, how long they've been stuck at that level, their finances as well, the financial situation, and also you got to look at the fan base's disposable income, because that's what's going to dictate affordability being able to afford to go to games, the higher up the league pyramids you get, the higher up the level you get, you end up having to charge more for tickets. Players are going to want bigger wages. And in order to attract players to the club, you've got to be able to pay players. And then you've got to sign players and transfer fees. So as you go up the pyramid, it costs the fan more with the ticket at the gate. And then you've got to look at the catchment area, disposable income of that catchment area can have an impact. Yeah, look, they can earn more money. They can get more away fans through the gate, which means bigger gate receipts, higher gate receipts. You know, when you're working on a tight profit margin, you want to make as much profit as possible. Playing in the English league system, there are some big clubs that have dropped down into the non-league that used to be football league clubs that they will now be playing against, who have reasonable fan bases and travel well when they're traveling away from home. But the Welsh League just doesn't have the money. Does not have the money. Doesn't have something called the FA Cup. The FA Cup, if Merthyr Tydfil were to go on a cup run, for example, think of the revenue that makes, the interest, suddenly you're on TV, televised game, you get more eyes on your product, you might get a player or two scouted by a club higher up the league system, comes in, transfer fee, that kind of thing. Plymouth, football, sailing is another one, and rugby union. Ironically, is Plymouth. Huntingdon, there's a couple of places called Huntingdon in the UK, ironically, in England. But the Huntingdon I think you're thinking of is in Cambridgeshire. And Cambridgeshire is a weird place. Peterborough and Cambridge, football. Peterborough's also got an ice hockey team. Cambridge obviously is a university city with a rowing club, and you've got cricket club, and so. But football is the professional sport of note. I don't know how they do rugby union. I think they've got a semi-pro rugby union club, but Cambridge being a university city, the university sports, for example, Huntingdon, which is not too far from one of the St Ives, because there's more than one St Ives in the country as well. Very small rural market town, probably have a local football club in the non-league, probably have a rugby union club in the lower amateur levels of rugby union, and probably have a cricket club. Of course, it's hate for the New Saints. They win all the time. It's fashionable to hate this, the tall poppy syndrome. Oh, and they're English. Firstly, they're English, and secondly, they win all the time because they've got the biggest budget. So tall poppy syndrome, and they're the foreigners. It's just how it is. Yeah, I mean, the new Saints obviously replaced the old Saints, obviously. But I mean, they've chosen to play in the Welsh League structure for reasons. They could play in the English League structure, but they've been very dominant in the Welsh League structure. And so, yes, that does create a bit of jealousy, hate, because they are successful. They are well run for the level they play at. And yeah, they will create a little bit of animosity and jealousy because haters are going to hate. But the fact they're still talking about it means they are respected. That makes sense. Why would Ealing and the Ospreys merge when Ealing play at one end of the M4 in London and the Ospreys play in Swansea? Will not work. So Ealing Trailfinders, the Neath Swansea Ospreys. Interesting merger, considering there's 120 miles difference between the two clubs. But no, I mean, yeah. But no, I mean, in regards to, I've discussed this at length for 6 years. I was discussing it before the 2019 World Cup. I was discussing it before COVID. I was discussing it After Wayne Pivac was sacked and Warren Gatland reappointed. We've been discussing it tonight. We've been discussing it. It's been in the news 7 years. I mean, Warren Gatland claimed he did not know the situation with Welsh rugby was as bad as it was, even though he was the coach the last time they were talking about restructuring the finances and restructuring the game in 2019. So Warren Gatland coming out and saying he wasn't aware of how bad the situation was I don't buy that. The fact that the players were basically on the verge of striking just before the Six Nations, and then Lewis Rees-Zammit decides, by the way, guys, I'm leaving, I'm changing sports, I'm going over to the US, and I'm going to be playing NFL. The warning signs have been there for a long time. The fact that their best young talented player, their most marketable player, is just basically retired from rugby in the age of 21, 22, tells you how bad the situation is when their best young prospect has just jacked the sport in and gone bye. And the fact that several senior players have basically retired from international rugby en masse, all at the same time, without a succession plan in place and the depth being there and the quality being there to replace those that have just retired, tells you all you need to know about the situation with Welsh rugby, where they've been very short-sighted and their selection rules are killing them. Because they're basically saying to all these Welsh players, you can't play overseas, you can't play outside of Wales. But the Welsh game cannot sustain test player wages, because you're going to command more money if you're a test player with your contract. You're going to be paid more. And the Welsh game cannot sustain the wages that they would be getting in France, in England, North America even. Super Rugby, if like a Super Rugby franchise, we can have an overseas player, they're willing to give Super Rugby a go for a couple of seasons. Wales cannot sustain that level of wage. They can't compete. And so these players are either A, paying for less money than they're worth, and B, they're not even, before the 2019 World Cup, some of the Welsh players weren't even guaranteed that they were going to have a club to go back to play for. It was that serious. We were on the cusp of the whole thing just collapsing on itself. It is a shambles. It has been a shambles since the 4 regions were set up. Technically, at one point they had 5. One failed, and we're going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, the early professional era. The transition from the amateur game to the professional game was not well handled, and the money is not in the Welsh game. Never has been. The Welsh game is struggling in regards to professionalism. The crowds aren't great, and the talent pool is a lot less now than what it was 15, 20 years ago. Looking at where Wales are trending, it's worrying. And as I said, look, the best young prospect coming through, Lewis Rees-Zammit. Well, you got Rio Dyer, but how long is he going to stick around? No, they haven't. I think rugby union is at a crossroads financially, and we're not even discussing the rule changes because of the potential for lawsuits for ex-players suing because of injuries like CTE and other injuries as well, and post-playing welfare and all that. The sport is at a crossroads financially. The COVID pandemic, much like with football and other sports as well, has exposed a lot of the bad finances that are in place and the overspend and the poor financial structures that are in place. It has sped up the process a little bit in regards to, I'm not a financial expert, I don't pretend to be, but we are seeing financial struggles. And football's been exposed, rugby union's been exposed, and there's been a lot of weak governance in there. And there's been, for some reason, my tap started leaking. It's really weird because I turned that off. Thank you. Yeah, there's been a lot of poor governance. I mean, I keep going back to the World Rugby election of 2019 when Augustine Peashot was going up against Bill Beaumont, and a lot of he was arguing about redistributing the wealth more evenly, basically suggesting that some of the top end talent take a little bit of a haircut in their wages, so the more money can be distributed to the up and coming talent and distributed more fairly. He lost that election, but he's been proven right. The fact he's now left World Rugby and sports governance in regards to rugby union altogether is really just sums up the old boys club that it is. But he highlighted a lot of issues. Now, not all of this, solutions that he came up with, or the ideas he came up with, are the right solutions for rugby union, but he came up with ideas. And he raised the warning flag. This is before COVID, saying we're overheating here. We've not got this right. Yeah, I mean, Keith Wood. I have a lot of respect for Keith Wood. Very experienced ex-player. But he had a lot of injuries. He had to retire because of injury. Now, whether he's taking the Irish Union and World Rugby to task as other ex-players are, is another thing. But yeah, he had some bad neck and shoulder injuries, and when he was playing at the top level, professionalism was in its infancy when he was at the peak of his powers for Ireland. But I think he first got capped by Ireland when it was still amateur days. I can't remember that. But obviously, he was a key part of the team from the late 90s to the early 2000s. I know in the 99 and 2003 World Cups, he was a big part of the Ireland setup for a good period, right at the end of the 90s and beginning of 2000s. And then he had to retire. That was him done. In 2003, that was him done. Yeah, that was his career done. But he was, when players of his level speak, you listen. When he's been obviously involved in the game 30, 40 years. But when people of his experience speak, you listen. Now, he's transitioned from playing to the media. He's done very, very well. And he's very well respected in the Irish and British media. And when someone of that standing within the sport, speaks and says there needs to be changes made, you listen. And I think a lot of the rule changes have been very reactionary rather than proactionary. And this is World Rugby panicking now, because instead of being proactionary with potential legal and stuff and making changes in regards to post-playing welfare and making sure that players are financially looked after and medically looked after post-retirement for longer. It's the same with rugby league, and we've had this argument with the Rugby League Players Association and the NRL which avoided a player strike, but we got very, very close to the players going on strike last season. A big part of it was to do with the payments made to players for medical expenses and who pays for the medical expenses and how much support they get post playing if they do have health issues and do have struggles. And a big part of that was the player welfare fund, how much money's in the fund, what remit the fund has for funding for player treatment and operations and recuperation and training. And I wouldn't say we need to reduce all sports matches played, because that then means you've either got to charge the fans more money, or the players have to take massive wage cuts, and I don't think they want either. I don't think fans want to pay more money for less of a product, and I don't think the players will be willing to take massive pay cuts. But then we hear the discussion of load management, and managing players, which becomes something else entirely. But then with the Rugby League Players Association in Australia and New Zealand with the NRL wants to play 2 extra games per season because they want to expand the league to 20 teams from 17. They want to expand, potentially 18 teams soon, but they want 20 teams within the next couple of years. And that's going to ultimately mean a longer regular season. Now, the Players Association want to have a say in voting yes or no to expand its season, or do we just get more bye rounds? Do we rotate how many times we play each team twice per season? And so that was one of the arguments in regards to the ongoing player league disputes that we had last year, which was actually an 18-month drawn-out process, but it came to a head last year. And there is that. In regards to sports like football and I mean, there's talk of expanding the NHL season to 84 games, so from 82. If you were to reduce the length of season, hypothetically, you could say, well, we're reducing the player wages, or we have to charge the fans more money to make the same income. And neither of those ideas are going to prove very popular with the players or the fans. And yeah, I've heard about the Jaguares coming back to Super Rugby. The Super Rugby format, I think, is still not perfect. There's still flaws with it, and there's issues financially in the Southern Hemisphere as well. It's not just an England and Wales problem in the Northern Hemisphere. Australia's got money problems. New Zealand's got money problems in regards to rugby union. And so this is what World Rugby needs to figure out and figure out quickly is what's happening with club rugby and also union finances. So the various unions, why are there suddenly money issues? Why are some of the tier 1 nations really struggling financially? Where's all the TV revenue gone? Where's all the money gone? So there is a lot to discuss there. Anyway, I've been going nearly 4 hours. I've got to be up early tomorrow, an hour earlier than normal. Good Friday. Bank holidays, I start an hour earlier, so I've got to be up early. I'm going to call it a stream. Thank you very much for the questions. I know we went a bit off topic and we started talking about, non-sport stuff, which was kind of cool. I do like going off on a tangent like that. Some of the questions really good. Obviously, we've covered a lot of stuff and a lot of sports. I didn't even get onto the England jersey situation and the controversy surrounding that with the flag on the neck, on the neckline, and it's a hark back to 1966, and the statement given by Nike and the FA is terrible. I don't think it's a bad design. I just think the price is ridiculous, and the way they've changed the structure of it with the materials used. They said the same. It's copy and paste of the Major League Baseball press release they did after the controversy there. Basically, they're making it more expensive for the consumer and making it cheaper as a manufacturer. That's basically what you're going to get. So you're going to get a lesser quality for more money. It shows how they've not read the room. They've tried to get around raising the price by saying we made some cheeky design changes. Now, the little flag on the back, if you are really smart, you'll know 2 of the colours are the bisexual pride colours of the pride flag. But if you're really, really a hardcore football nut and you know your football trivia, you will know that the piping on Sir Alf Ramsey's tracksuit top and the training tops of the England team of 1966 had those colours. But you would have to be a hardcore, real nerdy football nut job to know that. But the way they've worded the press release and the way they've gone, we've got a bit of cheeky twist and all this, kind of not great PR. But then you look at, how they changed the material design, the materials used. It's the same copy and paste with a few word changes. The Major League Baseball press release when they came out with the new Major League Baseball kits for this year, which are of a lower quality but a higher price. That's gone down really badly with fans and players. Let's see what players start saying about how the material of the kits feels, and how long, and the pricing's terrible, really expensive. But that's what I'm going to say on the jersey controversy for now. I may do a video on it over the weekend, discussing it, but I think it's a bit late in that. But it's not a good look, and the FA have come out, and politicians have got involved, including Emily Thornberry, who was very anti St George's flag, saying, "Well, that's a racist Brexit voter lives there," and all this BS. Right wing racist would do that, and she faced some backlash. I think it was during either a Euros or a World Cup, and she said something stupid. Suddenly, she likes the St George's Cross all of a sudden. You can tell that it's an election year when something as trivial as a slight tweak to a jersey design that not everyone likes, suddenly politicians are trying to get on the bandwagon for votes. So you can tell it's an election year. If this came out in 2 years' time or 2 years previously, the politicians aren't interested. They want your votes. Same with the Leichhardt situation. It's a safe Labour seat in Australia. They're currently the party in power. They're not going to do anything. They don't need to win the seat because they win it comfortably every year. No funding available. But if suddenly the polling was to change there, let's say the Labour government in Australia has a bad time, suddenly the polling changes, suddenly the funding will become available. It's all about party politics. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate all the stuff we talked about. And I will have some more content got for you guys very, very soon.